I woke from a coma to hear my own flesh and blood tell the emergency room doctors not to revive me again. In a state of absolute shock, trapped inside a paralyzed body, I pretended I was still unconscious. Thank God I did, because the terrifying things my children said next forced me to realize my entire life was a lie. I am Gregory, 69 years old, and what I am about to share will make you question the true motives of everyone you hold dear. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever discovered that the people who claim to love you most are actually waiting for your downfall. The darkness was heavy, suffocating, like being buried alive under a mountain of wet cement. Slowly, fragments of the world began to pierce through the void. First, it was the sharp, sterile scent of rubbing alcohol and iodine burning my nostrils. Then came the sound. A slow, rhythmic, agonizing beep echoing in my ears, measuring the fragile beats of my own failing heart. I tried to move my fingers, but they felt like lead. I tried to turn my head, but my neck was locked in a terrifying, invisible vice. Medical paralysis, sleep paralysis. Whatever it was, my mind was awake, but my body was a tomb. With an excruciating effort that felt like lifting a boulder, I managed to flutter my eyelids just a fraction of an inch. Through the blurry slit of my eyelashes, the harsh fluorescent lights of an intensive care unit stung my retinas. Shadows moved frantically around my bed. Nurses in blue scrubs darted past my peripheral vision, their voices a muffled, chaotic hum. I was trapped, a silent prisoner in my own flesh, screaming for help without making a sound. The rhythmic beeping of the monitor beside my head suddenly shifted. It grew faster, more frantic, a terrifying crescendo that signaled my life slipping away. The high-pitched alarm pierced the room, causing the scattered shadows to converge immediately around my bed. A tall doctor with graying hair rushed into my limited field of vision. His face was tense, etched with the kind of urgent grimace you only see when a life hangs by a thread. I could see his lips moving before the sound fully registered in my foggy brain. "His heart rate is plummeting," the doctor shouted, his voice cutting through the panic like a blade. "We are losing him. Get the crash cart right now. Charge the paddles to 200. We need to prepare the defibrillator immediately before he flatlines." The chaotic symphony of the emergency room escalated. I heard the frantic rustling of plastic wrappers being torn open, the heavy squeak of the defibrillator machine rolling across the linoleum floor, and the sharp, clinical commands of the nursing staff preparing to shock my chest. I wanted to tell them I was there. I wanted to shout that I could hear every terrifying word, that I was ready to fight, ready to breathe, ready to live. But my lips remained sealed, my jaw clenched shut by the lingering effects of the massive cardiac event I had suffered. I braced myself for the violent jolt of electricity. I waited for the sudden burst of pain that would bring me back from the brink of death. I needed that shock. I needed them to save me, but the jolt never came. Instead, the frantic flurry of life-saving medical action was abruptly halted by a voice that froze the blood in my veins. "Wait, stop." The voice belonged to Anthony, my 40-year-old son, the boy I had raised with every ounce of love and sweat I possessed. His tone was not filled with the frantic desperation of a son losing his father. It was chillingly calm. It was the calculated, emotionless voice of a corporate executive negotiating a contract, not a man standing over his dying father. The doctor paused, his hands hovering over the defibrillator paddles. "Excuse me," the doctor asked clearly, bewildered by the interruption. "We are losing his pulse. We have to act now." Anthony stepped closer to the edge of my bed. I could just barely see the crisp, expensive fabric of his tailored suit. "No," Dr. Anthony said, his voice steady, devoid of a single tremor of grief. "My father told me he never wanted to be a vegetable. He made his wishes perfectly clear to us. Sign the DNR, let him go, do not resuscitate him." The words hit me harder than any electrical shock ever could. They shattered my reality, tearing through my chest with a physical agony that eclipsed my failing heart. I could not believe it. It felt as if a jagged, rusted knife was being slowly twisted directly into my back by the very hands I had held when they took their first steps. Their calm, horrific resolve left me entirely paralyzed. Let him go. My own son was ordering the doctors to let me die. Suddenly, another sound filled the room. It was Monique, my 36-year-old daughter. "Oh, Daddy, no," she wailed loudly. The sound echoed off the sterile walls, a dramatic, breathless sobbing that was meant to sound like pure heartbreak. But I knew my daughter. I knew the difference between her genuine tears and her performances. This was synthetic. It was a theatrical display, a cheap act designed to sell Anthony's devastating command to the medical staff. "Please, doctor, respect my brother's words," Monique sobbed, her voice dripping with fake agony. "He is suffering too much. We cannot bear to see him like this. Let him rest in peace." They were standing right there, united in their horrific request, actively blocking the doctors from saving my life. The people I loved most in this world, the children I would have gladly traded my life for, were calmly orchestrating my execution while pretending to mourn me. My heart struggled to push another beat, suffocating under the crushing weight of their betrayal. Pure, unadulterated shock flooded my paralyzed mind. How had we arrived at this terrifying nightmare? I remembered the grueling decades I spent as a construction contractor in the sweltering heat of Atlanta. I remembered breathing in toxic concrete dust for 40 years, breaking my back, carrying heavy loads, all to build a strong foundation for them. I sacrificed my own health to pay every single cent of Anthony's Ivy League tuition, ensuring he never had to take out a single loan. I bought Monique her first car and funded her extravagant lifestyle so she would never feel less than her wealthy peers. My entire existence was a massive monument to their comfort. Now they were cashing in their chips. If I let the doctors reveal I was conscious, I would never know the full extent of their treacherous plan. They would simply put their loving masks back on and wait for another opportunity to destroy me. In a split-second decision fueled by raw survival instinct and a burning desire for absolute truth, I clamped my eyelids completely shut. I slowed my breathing down, forcing my body into complete stillness. I decided to play dead. The heavy silence in the intensive care unit was broken only by the erratic, agonizing beep of my failing heart monitor. The tall doctor stood frozen, his eyes darting between Anthony and Monique. You could see the moral conflict raging across his exhausted face. He was a man sworn to save lives, now being ordered to stand down by the very people who should have been begging him to fight. "Are you absolutely certain about this decision?" The doctor asked, his voice thick with frustration and professional reluctance. "Once I step out of this room and print the official "do not resuscitate" order, we cannot reverse course. If his heart stops completely, we will not intervene." Anthony did not even blink. "We are completely certain, doctor. My father lived a hard, practical life. He would hate being tethered to these machines. Please, just go print the paperwork. We want to say our final goodbyes in peace." The doctor let out a heavy, defeated sigh. He lowered his defibrillator paddles, placed them back onto the crash cart, and gave my motionless body one last pitying look. "I will be right back in 2 minutes with the forms," he said softly, turning on his heel and walking out of the glass doors. The heavy sliding door clicked shut behind him, sealing me inside a sterile glass cage with my executioners. The transformation was instantaneous. The very second the doctor's white coat disappeared down the long hospital corridor, the dramatic, breathless sobbing that Monique had been projecting completely vanished. The theatrical display of grief evaporated like mist under a scorching sun. The room fell deathly quiet, replaced by an atmosphere of cold, calculating impatience. They were dropping their masks entirely. A harsh, irritated whisper sliced through the sterile silence. It was Connor, Monique's white husband. I had always known him to be a failing entrepreneur, a man whose grand tech startup dreams always ended in crushing debts. Now his voice was laced with pure, desperate venom. "Sign the damn paper fast as soon as that doctor gets back." Anthony Connor snapped, pacing furiously at the foot of my bed. "I do not want any sudden miracles today. We cannot afford any mistakes. We are entirely too incredibly close to the finish line to let him pull through now." Anthony scoffed, crossing his arms defensively. "Relax, Connor. I have it under control." The doctor bought the entire compassionate son routine. He is not going to shock him. He is going to let him fade out just like we planned. Megan, Anthony's white wife, let out a sharp, mocking laugh. "You better have it under control, Anthony. Do you have any idea how much is riding on this? We need him gone today." Connor took a menacing step toward Anthony, his voice dropping into a sinister, guttural snarl that made the hair on my arm stand up. "You listen to me very carefully. Last night, when the old man clutched his chest and hit the living room floor, Monique and I were standing right there. We watched him gasp for air. We watched his face turn gray. Do you know what we did? We did absolutely nothing. We deliberately waited 45 agonizing minutes to call emergency services just to make sure he was done for. We sat on your expensive couch and watched him struggle to breathe until his eyes rolled back. Do not let my extreme effort go to waste. If he survives because you foolishly hesitate on a simple piece of hospital paperwork, I swear I will make you pay for it." The sheer brutality of Connor's confession hung in the air like a toxic cloud. 45 minutes. They had watched me collapse. They had watched my heart fail, and they had simply waited for the clock to run out. Monique chimed in, her voice completely devoid of the hysterical daughter persona she had played just moments ago. "Connor is right, Anthony. Sitting in that living room watching him twitch on the rug was the most stressful hour of my entire life. I was deeply terrified a nosy neighbor might hear him fall or look through the window. We took a massive calculated risk letting him lie there. You need to sign that do not resuscitate order the absolute second it touches your hands." Megan sighed loudly, tapping her designer heel against the linoleum floor. "I just want this over with. The estate lawyers are ready. The property developers are eagerly waiting for the green light. If he wakes up, the entire deal is completely dead. We will lose everything. Just sign the paper and let nature finally run its highly profitable course without any more pathetic delays." Beneath the thin hospital sheets, my paralyzed body trembled with an invisible, violent tremor. The profound sorrow that had initially crushed my spirit instantly evaporated. In its place, a dark, icy, and highly calculated rage began to pump through my veins. The puzzle pieces violently snapped together in my mind. The sudden heart attack I suffered last night was not an unfortunate medical tragedy. The agonizing chest pains, the struggle for oxygen, the desperate feeling of my body shutting down on that living room floor were not acts of God or simple biology. This was a deliberate, cold-blooded execution. It was attempted murder orchestrated by the children I had raised and the spouses they had chosen. They had stood over my dying body, casually watching me fade away, calculating the massive financial payout my death would bring them. My own flesh and blood had turned into ruthless predators. They viewed me as nothing more than a profitable obstacle standing between them and a luxurious future. The crushing weight of their ultimate betrayal did not break my mind. Instead, it hardened my broken resolve into an unbreakable razor-sharp weapon. I was a fierce survivor. In the suffocating darkness behind my tightly closed eyelids, I reached out to the only person who had ever truly loved me. I spoke silently to my late wife, Brenda. She had tragically passed away 5 years ago, leaving me to navigate this world alone. I pictured her warm, beautiful smile, her unwavering integrity, and the fierce protective love she always held for our family. I made a sacred, unbreakable vow to her memory right then and there. I absolutely refuse to simply die today. I will not let these greedy, soulless monsters inherit a single dime of the empire we built together from the ground up. I will force my failing heart to keep beating. I will endure this painful, temporary physical paralysis. I will survive this treacherous ambush solely to completely destroy them. I will dismantle their comfortable lives piece by piece. I will expose their sickening greed, their dark financial secrets, and their murderous intentions to the entire world. They thought they were burying a weak, senile old man. They had no idea they had just awakened a relentless force of vengeance. Brenda, I promised silently I'm going to make them pay for every single second. The heavy glass door slid open with a soft, mechanical hiss, breaking the tense, sinister silence of the hospital room. The tall doctor stepped back inside, his face drawn and weary, holding a stark white clipboard. On it rested the official "Do not resuscitate" order, the very document that would give my children the legal right to murder me through deliberate medical neglect. He handed a pen to Anthony. Anthony reached out with a perfectly steady hand, a look of grim satisfaction hiding just beneath his carefully arranged mask of false sorrow. He pressed the metal tip of the pen against the signature line. This was the absolute final second. I had to break my paralysis now, or my life would end right here on this sterile mattress. Drawing upon every last reserve of strength buried deep within my chest, I fought the heavy, invisible weight crushing my lungs. I focused entirely on my diaphragm, forcing a massive, desperate intake of air. The monitor beside me instantly screamed a chaotic rhythm. My body convulsed. I forced a violent, wet, and incredibly loud coughing fit that shook the entire bed frame. The sudden physical explosion startled everyone. My eyes snapped open wide and staring wildly at the fluorescent ceiling panels. The terrifying spell of sleep paralysis finally broke, shattered by my sheer raw will to survive. The doctor yanked the clipboard away from Anthony so fast the pen clattered loudly onto the linoleum floor. He immediately grabbed his stethoscope and leaned over my chest. His eyes are open, The doctor shouted, his previous exhaustion instantly replaced by pure medical adrenaline. "He is responsive. The patient is waking up. Cancel that order immediately." The crash cart nurses rushed back into the room, expertly pushing my family members out of their way. They checked my vitals, adjusted my oxygen mask, and stabilized my wildly fluctuating blood pressure. The deadly piece of paper that was meant to be my death warrant was tossed carelessly onto a nearby counter, instantly rendered completely null and void. I gasped for air, making sure to sound weak and disoriented, playing my part to perfection. I let my eyes roll slightly, mimicking the severe trauma they expected to see. Inside, my mind was razor sharp. I successfully derailed their cold, ruthless execution plan right at the final moment, securing my chance to fight back. While the dedicated medical staff scrambled around my bed to ensure my condition was stable, I subtly shifted my gaze toward the corner of the room where my treacherous family stood. They looked as though they had just witnessed a ghost rise directly from the grave. All the blood had violently drained from their terrified faces, leaving them ashen and sickly pale. Anthony stood perfectly frozen, his mouth hanging slightly open in total disbelief. He stared at his empty hands where the pen had been just a fleeting moment ago. His grand, wicked scheme had collapsed right before his eyes. Beside him, Monique gripped the edge of a medical tray to stop her knees from buckling under her. Her earlier dramatic sobbing was completely gone, replaced by a genuine, suffocating panic. She darted a frantic, terrified glance toward her white husband, Connor. Connor was aggressively chewing his lower lip, a nervous habit I recognized from whenever his tech startup loans were failing. He looked furiously angry, his fists clenched tightly at his sides as if he wanted to storm over and finish the job himself, but was trapped by the presence of the diligent nurses. Megan Anthony's cold and calculating white wife clutched her expensive designer handbag tightly against her chest like a shield. Her eyes darted nervously between the busy doctor, the discarded medical clipboard, and my fully open eyes. The comfortable, wealthy future they had spent the last 45 minutes planning over my dying body had just violently evaporated into thin air. I watched their beautiful, greedy dreams shatter into a million tiny, irreparable pieces. Their collective horror was absolutely delicious to witness. I simply blinked slowly, committing every detail of their panicked, desperate expressions to my memory for the bitter, uncompromising war ahead of us. Knowing I was currently surrounded by dangerous predators who would likely try another method to end my life, I knew I had to play the long game. I could not let them suspect I had heard a single word of their murderous conversation. As the doctor flashed a small penlight into my eyes, testing my pupil responses, I unleashed the greatest theatrical performance of my entire life. I let my jaw hang loosely, forcing a string of thick, unintelligible drool to pool at the corner of my mouth. "Mr. Hollis, can you hear me? Do you know where you are right now?" the doctor asked loudly, his voice echoing in the small room. I stared blankly past his shoulder, fixing my gaze on a blank patch of the hospital wall. I slowly turned my head toward Anthony. He stiffened, clearly terrified that I was about to expose their malicious 45-minute delay to the authorities. Instead, I forced a hollow, deeply confused smile. "Marcus," I slurred heavily, intentionally calling my own son by his uncle's name. "Marcus, did you bring the cement mixer? We need to pour the foundation today before it rains heavily." Anthony exhaled a massive, shuddering breath of profound relief. I watched his rigid shoulders instantly drop as he quickly exchanged a triumphant glance with his wicked wife. I slumped back against the hospital pillows, allowing my right arm to hang limply off the side of the bed as if all my muscles had completely failed. I babbled incoherently about phantom construction sites and forgotten childhood memories. To the untrained eye, the severe lack of oxygen from the heart attack had entirely fried my cognitive abilities. I appeared completely helpless, a shattered, broken vessel of a poor old man completely devoid of any real awareness. The doctor sighed sadly, stepping back from the bed to make several urgent notes on my medical chart. "It seems the prolonged lack of oxygen during his collapse has caused significant neurological impairment," the doctor explained softly to my treacherous children. "We will need to run several extensive cognitive tests, but you should strongly prepare yourselves for the incredibly harsh reality that his mental faculties may never fully recover." The moment the doctor turned his back to check the intravenous fluid monitors, Megan leaned in closely toward her husband. The heavy, expensive scent of her designer perfume wafted over my hospital bed, making my stomach churn with pure disgust. She leaned over my supposedly ruined body, acting like she was lovingly stroking my arm. But as she leaned in, Megan whispered maliciously to Anthony, her voice dripping with sheer venom. "It is fine, Anthony. His brain is completely fried. If he cannot even remember your name, it will make getting him legally declared mentally incompetent even easier than we thought. We will take everything." I lay perfectly still, ensuring my breathing remained shallow and steady. Behind my blank, vacant stare, my mind recorded every treacherous syllable. I heard every word. Exactly 2 weeks later, the hospital finally cleared me for discharge. The doctors handed a stack of medical instructions to Anthony, who nodded with an expression of dutiful concern that made my stomach turn. They strapped me into a transport wheelchair and rolled me out to his luxury SUV. During the silent drive back to my old neighborhood in Atlanta, I maintained my vacant stare, watching the familiar streets blur past the window. My beloved house, the very solid and beautiful foundation of my entire life, with Brenda slowly came into view. I had built that sturdy brick home with my own bare hands over 30 long years ago, cementing every single brick with immense pride and sweat. As Anthony awkwardly hoisted me out of the car and guided my shuffling feet up the front steps, a sharp, bitter pang of anger hit me. The moment I crossed the threshold, the blatant disrespect was completely undeniable. The warm, inviting home I remembered had been violently stripped of its soul. The living room walls, once adorned with beautiful memories, were shockingly bare. My eyes instantly locked onto a pathetic, battered cardboard box shoved carelessly into the corner by the front door. Inside that garbage box, completely unprotected and discarded like worthless junk, were Brenda's antique portraits. Those paintings were priceless family heirlooms passed down through 3 generations of her family, framing her elegant face that I loved so dearly. They had ripped her memory off the wall without a second thought to make room for some cheap, modern geometric garbage that now hung in its place. Megan and Monique were bustling around the kitchen, aggressively reorganizing my cabinets, tossing out my favorite coffee mugs, and replacing them with fancy espresso pods. They were happily nesting like greedy parasites who had completely conquered a brand new host. The sheer audacity of their actions burned inside my chest, a raging fire threatening to break through my carefully constructed facade of senility. I forced my hands to tremble slightly, clutching the wooden handle of my cane, pretending I did not recognize the desecration of my personal sanctuary. I slowly shuffled forward, dragging my right foot deliberately across the hardwood floor, playing the role of the broken, oblivious old man they desperately wanted me to be. I silently swallowed my fury, knowing my time for absolute vengeance was rapidly approaching. I dragged my feet further into the center of the living room and froze as an utterly infuriating sight greeted me. Connor, my daughter Monique's entitled white husband, was sprawled out comfortably in my favorite vintage leather armchair. That chair was my sacred spot, the exact place I sat every single evening to rest my aching bones after decades of grueling physical labor. Now this arrogant, failing entrepreneur had his dirty shoes propped casually on my mahogany coffee table. Worse still, he was holding a crystal tumbler filled with my premium 20-year-old aged whiskey, a rare bottle I had specifically saved for my 70th birthday. Connor did not even bother to stand up or offer a respectful greeting when I entered my own home. Instead, he took a slow, deliberate sip of my expensive liquor, smacking his lips with obnoxious satisfaction. He lowered the glass and glared at me with a look of absolute, undisguised contempt. "You took your sweet time getting discharged." Connor sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "Listen closely, because I am not going to repeat myself. Things are going to run very differently around here from now on." He lazily pointed a finger toward the narrow hallway leading to the back of the house. "You will sleep in there, old man." He was pointing directly at the cramped, windowless storage room near the laundry area, a damp, dusty closet barely large enough to hold a twin mattress and a mop bucket. "Monique and I are moving into the house permanently to oversee your so-called care," Connor continued arrogantly. "We need the master suite upstairs for our personal comfort. Do not try wandering around the main areas at night. Just stay in your closet and keep quiet." I stood there leaning heavily on my cane, forcing my jaw to slacken into a pathetic, confused drool. In my prime, I would have thrown this pathetic excuse for a man through the front door and tossed his belongings onto the street. To be commanded like a stray dog in the beautiful house I built from the dirt up was the ultimate insult. I gave him a weak, trembling nod, silently accepting his cruel banishment. I shuffled slowly toward the dismal storage closet, allowing him to revel in his pathetic illusion of absolute dominance and supreme authority over me. As I settled into the cold, miserable, dusty storage room sitting on the edge of a cheap, lumpy mattress they had carelessly thrown on the floor, I nodded vacantly at the peeling paint on the wall. Outside the flimsy door, I could hear them laughing and loudly claiming their new territories. They genuinely believed they had completely conquered me. They foolishly assumed I was just a broke retired construction worker surviving on meager Social Security checks and the equity of this single Atlanta home. Their blinding greed prevented them from seeing the absolute truth. They had absolutely no idea that decades ago, using my extensive knowledge of city planning, I quietly established a highly secretive limited liability company. Through that hidden corporate entity, I systematically purchased several neglected commercial lots. Today, those exact lots sit squarely in the middle of a massive, rapidly gentrifying district downtown. My hidden real estate portfolio is currently valued at a staggering $8 million in pure cash. They were aggressively torturing me over absolute pennies while I secretly controlled a massive fortune. I smiled internally, letting them desperately fight over useless crumbs while I quietly and patiently held the keys to the entire bakery. I waited patiently in the suffocating darkness of that cramped, dusty storage closet until the heavy footsteps upstairs finally ceased and the entire house fell into a deep, uninterrupted slumber. The loud, obnoxious snoring echoing from the master bedroom confirmed that Connor and Monique were fast asleep. Without making a single sound, I pushed the heavy blankets aside and stood up. The fragile, broken old man persona instantly vanished. I moved through the dark hallway with perfect, silent balance, my muscles working flawlessly, just as they had on the construction sites. I carefully navigated the familiar layout of my own living room without needing a single light. Reaching into the deep pocket of my trousers, I pulled out a tiny, high-tech micro-audio recorder. It was a sophisticated piece of surveillance equipment I had originally purchased years ago to catch thieves stealing materials from my various building sites. I knelt down silently beside the vintage leather armchair where Connor had so disrespectfully planted himself earlier. With swift practiced precision, I reached underneath the heavy cushion and firmly adhered the tiny recording device directly to the wooden frame. They foolishly thought I was blind and oblivious, but I was now fully listening. A few nights passed in agonizingly slow succession since I placed the hidden audio device beneath my leather armchair. Living inside that cramped, windowless storage closet was a test of supreme physical and mental endurance. During the daylight hours, I played the part of the broken, mindless old man perfectly. I drooled, I stared blankly at the walls, and I allowed my arrogant family members to push me around my own home like a piece of worthless, discarded furniture. They spoke openly in front of me, throwing around cruel insults and discussing their selfish plans, entirely convinced that my brain was completely destroyed. But when the clock struck midnight and the house plunged into absolute silence, I shed my pathetic disguise. The heavy snoring from the upstairs master bedroom signaled that the coast was clear. I quietly pushed the thin, uncomfortable blankets off my stiff legs and stood up in the pitch-black room. My body, hardened by decades of brutal construction work, moved with fluid, silent grace. I carefully opened the flimsy door to my storage closet, ensuring the rusty hinges did not make a single sound. The long hallway stretching toward the main living area was shrouded in thick, heavy shadows. I navigated the familiar path, flawlessly stepping exactly where I knew the floorboards would not creak. I knew every single inch of this solid brick house because I built it with my own two hands. I moved like a ghost through the chilling darkness, my senses heightened to maximum alert. Suddenly, a faint, flickering beam of artificial light caught my attention. It was spilling out from the kitchen, casting long, erratic shadows across the freshly polished hardwood floor. Someone else was awake and they were trying to hide. I crept toward the kitchen with absolute stealth, pressing my back flat against the cool plaster of the hallway wall. The heavy wooden door was pushed slightly ajar, leaving a narrow vertical crack just wide enough for me to observe the entire room without being detected. I leaned in and peered through the narrow opening, holding my breath to maintain total silence. Sitting at my custom granite island was Megan Anthony's scheming, materialistic wife. She was hunched aggressively over the kitchen countertop, a small, powerful LED flashlight clamped tightly between her white teeth to illuminate her workspace without turning on the overhead lights. She looked like a desperate, ravenous scavenger tearing into a fresh carcass. Spread out across the smooth stone surface was a massive chaotic stack of official banking documents and several checkbooks. I immediately recognized the distinct blue logo printed on the thick paper. They were the personal checks linked directly to my visible retirement account. That specific account held exactly $40,000, the modest sum they mistakenly believed was my entire life savings. To my greedy children and their spouses, that money was a temporary lifeline they were eager to drain before securing the ultimate payout from selling my house. Megan had a pen gripped tightly in her right hand and a discarded envelope with my authentic signature placed directly in front of her for reference. Her eyes darted frantically between my real signature and the blank checks. She was furiously practicing my handwriting on a scrap piece of paper, her wrist moving in sharp, jerky motions as she tried to replicate the exact loops and curves of my name. She muttered angry curses under her breath every time a stroke looked incorrect, aggressively crossing out the failed attempts and starting over with renewed malicious intensity. The sheer audacity of her actions made my blood boil with an intense burning fury. She was not just stealing my hard-earned money, she was actively committing multiple counts of federal financial fraud right in the middle of my own kitchen. She was meticulously preparing to drain the only funds she thought I had left in the world, leaving me utterly destitute before throwing me into a miserable cheap state facility. I watched her rip a brand new check from the booklet, clearly satisfied with her recent practice attempts. She carefully positioned the pen and slowly, methodically signed my name onto the bottom line. She held the forged financial document up to the beam of her flashlight, a sinister, victorious smirk spreading across her face. The forgery was evidently flawless enough to easily fool any unsuspecting bank teller. She had successfully stolen my identity in the dead of night, acting with the cold, calculated precision of a seasoned, unremorseful criminal. Her absolute lack of hesitation proved she had likely done things like this before. The blatant deception was entirely deliberate and shockingly bold. I knew that merely witnessing this blatant crime was not nearly enough. To completely destroy these vicious predators, I needed absolute, undeniable proof that would hold up in any courtroom. Reaching into the deep pocket of my sweatpants, I carefully pulled out a secret prepaid smartphone. I had discreetly ordered the untraceable device online and had it delivered to a secure private post office box just days before my supposed medical decline. My family had absolutely no idea this untraceable phone even existed. I silently activated the camera application, meticulously ensuring the flash was completely disabled and the screen brightness was turned all the way down to a dull, imperceptible glow. I positioned the camera lens squarely through the narrow gap in the doorway, focusing directly on Megan's illuminated face and her busy criminal hands. I hit the record button. The high-definition, 4,000-pixel camera captured every single damning detail with crystal-clear perfection. I recorded her methodically forging my signature onto 4 separate checks, her face illuminated brightly by the flashlight clamped securely in her teeth. I captured the distinct, sinister smirk of triumph that crossed her lips as she finished the final fraudulent document. I kept the camera rolling steadily as she greedily gathered the freshly forged checks and swiftly stuffed them deep into the side pocket of her expensive, heavily branded designer purse. The irony was utterly sickening. She was using the stolen funds of a man she intended to murder just to maintain her pathetic, materialistic facade. I captured 2 full minutes of flawless, high-quality digital evidence. The footage was an absolute masterpiece of criminal self-incrimination. It was the ultimate weapon I needed to initiate their total financial and legal ruin. I gently tapped the screen, saving the file securely. With the damning video safely stored securely on the hidden device, I slowly backed away from the bright kitchen door. I retraced my steps through the pitch-black hallway, moving with the same flawless, silent, deadly precision that had brought me there. I slipped back into my cramped, dusty storage room and softly clicked the flimsy door shut. I carefully hid the secret smartphone inside a hollowed-out space beneath the floorboards. As I lay back down on the lumpy mattress, a cold, triumphant smile crossed my face. I had just secured the first piece of undeniable explosive criminal evidence. The harsh, bright morning sun slowly filtered through the narrow crack beneath my storage room door, signaling the start of another grueling day of deception. I lay completely still on my lumpy mattress, listening intently as the heavy footsteps of my treacherous family thundered across the hardwood floors above me. Doors slammed, car keys jingled, and hurried voices echoed through the hallway. They were leaving for their various daily routines, completely oblivious to the fact that the helpless old man in the closet was systematically plotting their ultimate destruction. The heavy front door finally slammed shut, followed by the distinct sound of the deadbolt clicking into place. I waited 10 full minutes to ensure no one had forgotten a briefcase or a purse. When the driveway remained silent, I pushed the thin blanket aside and stood up with sharp, focused energy. My frail, pathetic, senile disguise was instantly discarded. I walked purposefully into the brightly lit living room, savoring the rare moment of absolute solitude in my own home. I moved directly toward the vintage leather armchair where Connor had so disrespectfully lounged the day before. Dropping to one knee with practiced ease, I carefully reached my right hand deep underneath the heavy black leather cushion, feeling along the rough wooden frame. My fingers brushed against the small, smooth plastic casing of the micro-audio recorder I had planted. I pulled it out and examined the blinking green light, confirming the device had been actively recording their every word throughout the entire evening and early morning. I quickly transferred the tiny memory card into my hidden smartphone and placed the earpiece into my ear. I was about to uncover the exact reasons why my own flesh and blood had decided to orchestrate my brutal murder. I gently tapped the play icon on the dark screen of my phone, and the high-fidelity recording instantly flooded my ear. The audio began with the distinct clinking of crystal whiskey glasses, quickly followed by the heavy, angry footsteps pacing across the living room floor. The tension in the air was palpable even through the digital audio file. Then a vicious, throat-tearing screaming match erupted violently between Anthony and Connor. Their carefully curated public personas of wealthy, successful young men were completely obliterated in seconds. They sounded like desperate, trapped animals fighting over a shrinking scrap of meat. "You need to keep your pathetic wife under control," Connor snarled viciously, his voice vibrating with absolute panic. Megan almost blew the entire operation last night by practicing his signature right in the middle of the kitchen, where anyone could have easily seen her through the window. "We cannot afford careless mistakes right now. Do you understand me? I am drowning here." The sharp sound of a glass shattering against the brick fireplace echoed loudly. "Do not tell me how to manage my wife," Anthony roared back, his voice cracking under immense, unmanageable pressure. "You are not the only one drowning in this nightmare, Connor. The walls are closing in on me at the corporate office. The internal auditors flagged my division accounts yesterday morning. They are quietly digging into the quarterly vendor reports right now, and they are going to find the missing funds by Friday at the absolute latest. I foolishly embezzled exactly $150,000 from the corporate expense accounts to cover the massive losses on my bad margin trades. If I do not silently replace that exact cash amount before the senior audit review on Monday morning, my boss is going to bypass human resources and call the federal authorities directly. I will lose my career, my license, and I will spend the next 10 years rotting in a federal penitentiary." Connor let out a harsh, breathless laugh that sounded more like a desperate sob. $150,000. That is absolutely nothing compared to the monumental mess I have created, Connor yelled, his voice rising in terror. "My highly praised tech startup is a complete and total illusion. The entire company went bankrupt 6 months ago, and I have been lying to the investors to keep the doors open. I am utterly broke, Anthony. I am so deeply in the red that I borrowed heavy cash from unsavory people. Actual loan sharks, Anthony. Do you understand the severity of this? They definitely do not ever send polite legal notices when you miss a payment. They send violent men to your house. They cornered me in the parking garage last Tuesday and explicitly threatened to break both of my kneecaps if I do not hand over $200,000 in clean, untraceable cash by the end of the month. Monique has absolutely no idea that her luxurious lifestyle is being funded by dangerous criminals who know exactly where we sleep." I stood frozen in the center of the living room, listening to the horrifying reality of their pathetic, miserable lives unfold. My own son was a desperate corporate thief on the brink of federal indictment, and my son-in-law was a fraudulent, bankrupt liar marked for severe physical violence by dangerous underworld criminals. Their polished, upscale facades were entirely fake. They were drowning in a toxic ocean of immense debt, greed, and imminent criminal prosecution. Their immense, overwhelming financial desperation was the sole driving force behind their chilling decision to murder me. The audio recording continued to capture their vicious plotting as Anthony sharply cut off Connor's frantic complaining. "We are in terrible danger, Connor. Anthony declared, his voice cold and ruthlessly pragmatic. That is exactly why we absolutely must execute this plan flawlessly without any further delays. We need to force my father into a cheap public psychiatric asylum by the end of this week. Once the fake doctor signs the declaration of mental incompetence, I will use the power of attorney to immediately seize full control over his assets. Connor let out a heavy, anxious breath. Are you absolutely certain the commercial developers are still willing to pay the full asking price? They are aggressively buying up this entire gentrifying neighborhood, Anthony replied confidently. I spoke with the lead acquisitions director just yesterday afternoon. They are extremely desperate to secure this specific corner lot to complete their massive luxury apartment project. They have $1.5 million in clean, untraceable cash sitting in an escrow account, just waiting for my authorized signature. We force the old man into the miserable psychiatric ward. We sell this dusty brick house to the greedy developers, and we quietly split the massive payout right down the middle. $1.5 million is more than enough to silence your violent loan sharks, satisfy my corporate auditors, and keep our incredibly spoiled wives completely oblivious to our disastrous financial failures. We just need to make sure he appears completely broken and senile before the final paperwork is signed. If we fail, I go to a federal prison and you end up in a hospital with shattered legs. I pulled the earpiece out, the grim, terrifying reality fully exposed. They needed me to be locked away in an institution to save themselves from total destruction. With the horrifying truth of their financial desperation ringing in my ears, I carefully placed the secret smartphone back into my pocket. My physical heart ached, a deep, pulsating reminder of the severe medical trauma I had just survived. The doctors at the hospital had been incredibly specific about my strict recovery protocol. I was required to take a highly potent specialized cardiovascular medication twice a day to prevent a catastrophic secondary infarction. Without those vital pills, my weakened heart would rapidly fail, resulting in a swift and completely natural-looking death. I shuffled slowly toward the master bathroom, maintaining my hunched, pathetic posture just in case one of my greedy relatives returned unexpectedly. The small amber prescription bottle was sitting exactly where Anthony had placed it on the marble counter the night I was discharged. I reached out and grabbed the plastic container. It felt perfectly normal in my calloused hand. I popped the child-proof safety cap off and tapped 2 pills onto my palm. Immediately, my sharp, detail-oriented contractor eyes noticed a terrifying discrepancy. I had taken this exact same medication for years before the recent heart attack, so I intimately knew exactly what the pharmaceutical tablets were supposed to look like. The genuine pills were a pale, chalky white with a very distinct alphanumeric code stamped cleanly across the center. The pills currently resting in the center of my hand were entirely different. They were slightly larger, carrying a faint, glossy, yellowish tint, and they completely lacked the powdery, chalky residue that usually coated the bottom of the plastic bottle. There was absolutely no identifying pharmaceutical stamp on either side of the hard, glossy coating. I brought the mysterious tablets closer to my face, examining the smooth surface under the bright vanity lights. I cautiously lifted my hand and sniffed the unfamiliar medication. Instead of the bitter, sterile chemical odor of prescription heart medicine, a very faint, distinctly sweet and citrusy scent hit my nostrils. It smelled exactly like a cheap generic over-the-counter dietary supplement. A sudden, chilling wave of absolute dread washed over my entire body. My hands began to shake, not from my fabricated senility, but from the sheer, unadulterated evil I was holding. I stared intently at the amber bottle, the chilling reality of my very dangerous and highly volatile situation becoming undeniably clear to me. I carefully placed the 2 fake pills back into the clear plastic container. The dark pieces of their highly sinister puzzle snapped violently into place inside my mind. Megan, my treacherous, deeply greedy, and manipulative daughter-in-law, had deliberately replaced my essential life-saving cardiovascular medication with a bottle filled entirely with cheap, worthless vitamin C tablets. I distinctly remembered watching her hover around the kitchen counter near my medical supplies just yesterday afternoon. She had slyly and deceptively volunteered to organize my pill organizers, claiming she was simply trying to help alleviate my daily burden. I had foolishly assumed she was just playing the role of the devoted caregiver to appease Anthony. Now her true dark intentions were completely exposed. They were not merely waiting for my health to decline, they were actively working to violently accelerate the process. A fake psychiatrist could easily declare my mind broken, but selling the house and liquidating my assets required time they simply did not possess. Anthony's corporate auditors were quickly closing in on his massive embezzlement, and Connor's violent loan sharks were violently threatening his kneecaps. They needed the massive real estate payout immediately. If I suffered a massive fatal heart attack right here in the master bathroom, all of their pressing financial problems would magically vanish overnight. The medical examiner would effortlessly conclude that my heavily damaged heart had simply given out naturally due to my advanced age and recent trauma. It was the absolute perfect, untraceable, and flawless crime. No one in the entire world would ever suspect a grieving, devoted family of carefully orchestrating a calculated assassination using common grocery store vitamins. They wanted me permanently erased, buried deep underground, allowing them to finally steal the immense hidden wealth I had slowly accumulated during my entire life. My mind raced with sharp surgical precision as I carefully formulated my counterattack. I knew I could not simply throw the tampered bottle away or replace it with the proper medication. Megan had undoubtedly left a massive cluster of her criminal fingerprints all over the smooth amber plastic. That specific plastic bottle was a critical piece of hard physical forensic evidence that would eventually seal her grim fate in a federal courtroom. I opened the bottom drawer of the bathroom vanity and grabbed a pair of long metal tweezers. Holding my breath, I used the cold metal tips to gently lift the prescription bottle by its rim, ensuring I did not smudge any of her incriminating prints. I carefully lowered the entire bottle into a clear, thick plastic Ziploc bag and firmly sealed the top edge tight. I quietly slipped the sealed evidence bag deep into the hidden interior pocket of my heavy winter coat hanging nearby in the hallway closet. Tomorrow morning, while they foolishly believed I was sleeping away my final days, I would transfer the bag into the secure fireproof floor safe hidden beneath the loose floorboards in my dusty storage room. But I still desperately needed my actual life-saving medication to survive their horrific ongoing psychological war. Using my secure, untraceable smartphone, I accessed my private medical portal. I swiftly requested an emergency 90-day refill of my authentic cardiovascular prescription, instructing the pharmacy to discreetly mail the unmarked package directly to a private post office box I had secretly maintained for several decades. I would stealthily retrieve my real medicine in exactly 2 days. Until then, I had a small, hidden emergency stash of pills safely tucked inside my leather wallet. I confidently swallowed my real medication, feeling my physical strength and determination surge. To guarantee their ultimate downfall, I needed to grant them a blinding, false sense of absolute victory. That evening, as we all sat around the massive dining table they had completely hijacked, I initiated my brilliant psychological counteroffensive. Megan placed a plate of heavily salted, unhealthy food in front of me, glaring with barely concealed impatience. I slowly lifted my fork purposefully, letting my hand tremble violently before deliberately dropping the heavy metal utensil onto the hardwood floor with a loud, pathetic clatter. I dramatically slumped forward against the table, aggressively clutching the left side of my chest. I let out a deep, agonizing, wet groan, forcing my facial muscles to contort into a mask of pure physical agony. My eyes rolled back slightly, mimicking the exact symptoms of a rapidly failing cardiovascular system. The table instantly fell silent. Through my partially closed eyelashes, I watched the predators react. Megan shot a thrilling, electric glance toward Anthony. Her lips curled upward into a sinister, deeply satisfied smirk. Connor leaned back in his chair, quietly tapping his fingers together in gleeful anticipation. They foolishly believed their lethal, murderous trap was working perfectly, totally oblivious to their impending catastrophic and absolute doom. The next morning arrived with a sickening display of their arrogance. Thinking my dramatic performance at the dinner table the night before meant I was finally on my last legs, my treacherous family decided to reward themselves. They loudly announced they were heading to an upscale celebratory brunch at a fancy bistro downtown. Anthony shouted through my thin closet door that they would be gone for a few hours and told me to just sleep and stay out of the way. I listened as the front door slammed shut and the heavy deadbolt turned. I waited by the small, dusty window until Connor's luxury vehicle pulled out of the driveway and disappeared down the street. The absolute second they were gone, the feeble old man vanished. I stood up perfectly straight, grabbed my heavy winter coat containing the sealed evidence bag, and pulled out my secret smartphone. I quickly opened a ride-sharing application and ordered a premium black car service to my exact location. I needed an unmarked vehicle with tinted windows to ensure none of the nosy neighbors spotted me leaving the property. A sleek black luxury sedan arrived at the curb within 7 minutes. I locked the front door behind me, slipping an extra house key into my pocket. I climbed into the spacious back seat of the premium vehicle, instructing the professional driver to take me directly to the central business district. As the car sped smoothly away from the neighborhood, I felt a massive surge of adrenaline replacing the physical weakness I had been faking. I was no longer playing defense in my own hijacked home. I was finally launching a brutal, calculated offensive strike against my enemies. The black sedan pulled up smoothly in front of a towering glass skyscraper in the heart of the Atlanta financial district. I tipped the driver handsomely in cash, stepped out of the vehicle, and walked with absolute confidence through the revolving doors. I bypassed the main reception desk and took the private executive elevator directly to the 42nd floor. This was the prestigious headquarters of Harrington & Associates. I walked straight into the corner office of my longtime attorney and trusted confidant Robert Harrington. Robert and I had done incredibly lucrative business together for over 3 decades. He was a brilliant, sharp-minded legal shark who had masterfully orchestrated the complex paperwork for my hidden corporate entity years ago. When I walked through his heavy mahogany door without a cane, walking perfectly upright instead of the crippled state he had heard about, his jaw practically hit the floor. "Gregory," he gasped, standing up so quickly his expensive leather chair rolled backward. "Anthony called my office yesterday and claimed you had suffered a massive stroke. He said you were entirely incapacitated and completely bedridden." I locked the heavy wooden door behind me and walked purposefully toward his massive mahogany desk. "Anthony is a pathological liar and a desperate corporate thief," I replied, my voice booming with steady, unbroken authority. I reached into the hidden pocket of my winter coat and pulled out the clear Ziploc bag containing the tampered amber prescription bottle heavily coated in Megan's criminal fingerprints. I placed it gently onto the center of his polished desk. Next, I retrieved the silver USB flash drive containing the high-definition video of the check forgery and the terrifying audio recordings from the hospital room. I dropped the metallic drive right beside the plastic bag with a sharp clink. I sat down and looked him directly in the eyes. "I need your absolute best legal warfare, Robert. My children are actively trying to execute me." Robert frowned in deep confusion, putting on his reading glasses. He picked up the silver flash drive and plugged it directly into his secure laptop. I sat in silence as he opened the files. First, he watched the crystal-clear video of Megan furiously forging my signature onto the retirement checks in the dead of night. His eyes widened in absolute shock at her blatant criminality. Then I instructed him to play the audio files. The room filled with Connor and Anthony's vicious screaming match about the corporate embezzlement and the violent underground loan sharks. Then the hospital recording played. The undeniable sound of Connor admitting they deliberately waited 45 minutes to call emergency services echoed chillingly through the luxurious legal office. Robert froze, completely staring at the plastic bag containing the fake vitamin C pills intended to force a fatal cardiac event. He swallowed hard, unable to look away from the physical evidence of their treachery. The sheer magnitude of their ruthless betrayal hung heavily in the tense, deeply uncomfortable, quiet air. Robert slowly pushed his chair back from the polished wooden desk, removing his reading glasses with trembling fingers. He dragged his hands down his face, visibly horrified by the sheer depth of the depravity he had just witnessed. As a seasoned lawyer, he had handled brutal corporate takeovers and bitter family inheritance disputes, but this was an entirely different level of evil. "Gregory," he said, his voice dropping into a harsh, deadly serious whisper, "I expected you to show me proof of them trying to drain your bank accounts or trick you into signing away the deed to your property. But this is not just financial abuse. This is not just elder fraud. The deliberate 45-minute delay in calling the paramedics while you lay dying on the floor, combined with replacing your life-saving cardiovascular medication with cheap grocery store vitamins, crosses a massive legal line. This is premeditated, attempted murder. They are actively trying to kill you to cover up their own massive financial crimes and disastrous debts. If you go back to that house, they will absolutely try another lethal method to end your precious life today. We must stop them right now, my old friend." Robert immediately reached for the sleek black landline phone sitting on the corner of his desk. "I am calling the police chief right now to have them all arrested before they can hurt you again," he stated firmly. I slammed my hand down hard over his fingers, physically stopping him from lifting the receiver. "No, Robert!" I commanded, my eyes locking onto his with an intense, burning determination. "Calling the authorities right now is far too easy for them. They would simply hire expensive defense lawyers and quietly fight the charges behind closed doors. They wanted to humiliate me and discard me like trash. So I want to publicly destroy them on their absolute biggest stage. I want them to feel the exact same sheer terror and utter helplessness that I felt while paralyzed in that hospital bed. I leaned in closer, dropping my voice to a dangerous, calculating tone. Before we bring down the criminal hammer, we need to completely annihilate their financial future. Set up an irrevocable trust for my $8 million limited liability company immediately. Lock the Atlanta house and every single cent I own inside it so they can never, ever touch it again, Robert. I left Robert's office with the legal machinery already in motion. The premium black sedan rushed me back to the quiet suburban street just minutes before my treacherous family returned from their extravagant downtown brunch. I slipped through the front door, locked it, and hurried to my cramped storage room. I quickly shed my heavy winter coat, hid my secret smartphone under the floorboards, and collapsed onto the lumpy mattress, perfectly resuming the posture of a frail, oblivious old man. I heard the heavy front door swing open. Loud, obnoxious laughter echoed through the hallway as Connor and Monique stumbled inside, clearly intoxicated from expensive daytime cocktails paid for with my stolen retirement funds. Anthony and Megan followed closely behind, their voices hushed, but carrying a sharp, nervous energy. As the evening shadows lengthened, the atmosphere in the house shifted dramatically. The front doorbell rang around 7 o'clock. I peeked through the narrow crack of my closet door and saw Anthony usher a greasy, heavily sweating stranger into the living room. The man wore a cheap, wrinkled suit and carried a battered leather briefcase that looked like it had seen significantly better days. I recognized the despicable type immediately from my decades in the construction business. He was a bottom-feeding, corrupt notary public who would happily validate a completely fraudulent document for a few $100s in untraceable cash. Anthony aggressively grabbed my arm, yanking me out of the storage room with unnecessary force. He dragged my supposedly weakened body into the dining room, shoving me roughly into a hard wooden chair. Megan stood right beside him, her eyes gleaming with dark, predatory excitement over what was about to happen. The shady notary kept his eyes glued firmly to the floor. It was set. Anthony reached into the inside pocket of his expensive, perfectly tailored suit jacket and pulled out a thick stack of pristine legal papers. He slammed the entire bundle down onto the smooth surface of the dining table with a harsh, echoing smack that made the corrupt notary flinch nervously. Printed across the very top of the first page in bold, unapologetic black letters were the words, "Full power of attorney." It was the ultimate devastating legal weapon they desperately needed to finalize their treacherous financial takeover. Anthony leaned over the polished wooden table, placing both of his hands flat against the surface. He positioned his face inches away from mine, completely dropping any remaining facade of a loving, concerned son. His eyes were cold, hollow, and utterly devoid of a single ounce of human empathy. "Listen to me very carefully, Dad," Anthony demanded, his voice dropping into a sinister, threatening whisper that sent a legitimate shiver down my spine. "You are going to take this pen, and you are going to sign your name on the dotted line right now. You are going to sign over absolute legal control of this house, your remaining bank accounts, and every single decision regarding your medical care directly to me." I let my jaw hang loosely, forcing a thick string of saliva to pool at the corner of my mouth, pretending I could not comprehend his ruthless demands. Anthony sneered in absolute disgust, wiping a stray drop of my fabricated drool off the table with his sleeve. "Do not play dumb with me tonight," he growled, slamming his fist down hard enough to rattle the chandelier above us. "Sign this right now, Dad, or we are putting you in the state asylum tomorrow morning. Your mind is completely gone and you cannot physically fight us anymore." Connor walked into the dining room, leaning casually against the doorframe with a smug, arrogant grin plastered across his face. "You should probably just do what he says, old man," Connor added maliciously. "The public psychiatric wards in this city are completely horrific. They will strap you to a filthy bed and heavily medicate you until you forget your own name. Here in your own house, we are actually offering you a very generous mercy. Just sign the paperwork and we will let you rot in peace." I stared blankly at the aggressive men standing before me. Megan stepped forward and forcefully shoved a heavy brass ballpoint pen directly into my right hand. She curled my rigid, uncooperative fingers tightly around the smooth metal casing, practically forcing my arm downward toward the pristine legal document waiting on the table. This was the defining moment. My brilliant and highly experienced lawyer, Robert Harrington, had explicitly warned me during our secret downtown meeting to never under any circumstances place my actual verifiable signature on any document they provided. Doing so would grant them terrifying, unchecked legal authority over my remaining visible assets and my personal health directives. I needed a flawless, untraceable loophole. I slowly lowered the tip of the brass pen toward the dotted line, allowing my entire hand to shake violently, simulating the severe, debilitating tremors of advanced neurological decay. I let out a soft, pathetic whimper, glancing nervously at Anthony's furious, impatient face. I pressed the dark ink onto the thick paper. Instead of signing my legal name, Gregory Hollis, I deliberately and meticulously scribbled out a completely nonsensical juvenile phrase. With shaky, uneven letters that looked like the frantic scrawling of a confused toddler, I wrote G.H. Daddy. It was a perfectly absurd, legally void mark that no legitimate banking institution or federal court would ever accept as a binding authorization. It was pure, unadulterated gibberish designed specifically to render their precious power of attorney entirely worthless. I finished the final messy loop of the ridiculous signature and let the heavy brass pen slip clumsily from my fingers. It rolled slowly across the polished wood, leaving a faint streak of black ink behind. I slumped backward into the dining chair, staring blankly at the ceiling fan, fully committing to my masterful, Oscar-worthy performance of a completely broken, confused, and utterly defeated old man. The corrupt, heavily perspiring notary public did not even bother to verify the sloppy, incomprehensible scribble I had just left on the signature line. He hastily pulled a heavy metal notary stamp from his battered leather briefcase, slammed it down forcefully onto the thick paper, and quickly scrawled his own fraudulent signature beside the raised seal. Anthony practically snatched the validated legal document right off the dining room table, holding it up like a massive victorious trophy. He burst into a loud, incredibly arrogant fit of laughter, turning immediately to high-five Connor and pull Megan into a tight, celebratory embrace. They were completely euphoric, genuinely believing they had just won a massive multi-million-dollar lottery ticket. "Look at this beautiful piece of paper," Anthony cheered, waving the utterly worthless voided document aggressively in the air. "We finally have absolute, undisputed control over everything. We can list the house tomorrow morning and start the psychiatric commitment process by Friday." Megan smiled wickedly at him, eyeing my slumped, drooling figure with intense satisfaction. "We finally did it today," she whispered maliciously. I sat motionless in the hard wooden chair, secretly relishing their absolute, completely pathetic, and entirely fabricated temporary victory. The very next morning, the intoxicating euphoria of their supposed legal victory quickly crashed into a massive bureaucratic brick wall. Anthony had aggressively emailed a scanned copy of the newly signed power of attorney directly to the commercial real estate developers, eagerly anticipating an immediate wire transfer for the $1.5 million purchase of my property. Instead of a lucrative confirmation, he received a firm, legally binding rejection that sent the entire household into a frantic tailspin. The corporate acquisition attorneys representing the massive development firm were incredibly thorough and highly risk-averse. They absolutely refused to process such a massive property transfer based solely on a freshly minted power of attorney without ironclad medical documentation to back it up. To fully execute the sale of the house and legally shield the developers from any future liability, they strictly required an official certified medical sign-off. They needed a licensed physician to provide a sworn affidavit proving definitively that I was mentally unfit to object to the transaction. I listened from the dark confines of my storage closet as Anthony slammed his fists against the kitchen counter in pure rage. He screamed at Connor that finding a legitimate doctor to deliberately misdiagnose me within 48 hours would be completely impossible. Real medical professionals required extensive neurological testing, detailed brain scans, and comprehensive patient histories. A legitimate doctor might actually discover that I was perfectly healthy, or even worse, notice the dangerous inconsistencies in my current medication routine. They were entirely trapped by the very legal system they were trying to manipulate. But criminals always find a darker path when their backs are pushed against the wall, and Connor quickly proposed a deeply sinister, highly illegal alternative solution to bypass the developer's strict demands. Just a few hours after that frantic morning argument, the heavy front door swung open and my daughter Monique walked inside. She confidently ushered a tall, sharply dressed man into the living room, introducing him to Anthony and Megan as a highly specialized private physician. The man carried a sleek leather medical bag and wore an expensive white coat over a designer shirt, looking every bit the part of a distinguished neurologist. Monique proudly announced that this man, introduced solely as Dr. Vance, was uniquely qualified to conduct rapid in-home cognitive assessments for elderly patients. However, the absolute second this supposed medical professional spoke, a massive wave of recognition washed over me. I had a phenomenal memory for voices, a crucial skill I developed during my long career managing massive construction sites. I instantly recognized his distinct, arrogant tone from the hidden audio recordings I had captured just a few days prior. This man was not a licensed doctor at all. He was one of Connor's shady, degenerate gambling buddies from the underground poker games, a desperate fraudster who owed just as much money to the violent loan sharks as Connor did. They had explicitly hired a desperate criminal to impersonate a medical professional. Dr. Vance set his heavy leather bag on the coffee table and pulled out a stack of incredibly authentic-looking medical forms, complete with a stolen hospital letterhead. He casually shook hands with Connor, exchanging a brief, incredibly sinister look of mutual understanding that completely betrayed their deep criminal association. Monique aggressively pulled me out of my dark storage closet, dragging me into the center of the living room. She pushed me roughly down onto the sofa, practically ordering the fake psychiatrist to begin his evaluation immediately. Dr. Vance flipped open a shiny silver pen and stared at me with completely hollow, unfeeling eyes. He did not bother checking my pulse, testing my reflexes, or performing a single legitimate physical examination. Instead, he simply began checking off random boxes on his fraudulent medical forms, loudly declaring that my symptoms clearly indicated advanced, irreversible neurological decay. He was meticulously building a completely fabricated medical history right in front of my eyes, writing down aggressive lies that would legally classify me as severely incapacitated. This fraudulent performance was the exact key they needed to forcefully unlock my assets. I knew this was a critical moment for my ultimate revenge. I instantly unleashed the absolute greatest acting performance of my entire life. To secure their own imminent destruction, I needed to ensure this fake doctor fully committed to his massive federal crime by signing that official document. I let my mouth hang wide open, allowing a thick stream of saliva to slide down my chin and soak into my collar. I deliberately let my eyes roll back slightly, fixing my vacant stare on a completely blank patch of the living room wall. I began to rock my torso back and forth, moving in a slow, highly disturbed, and deeply unsettling rhythmic motion. I raised my trembling right hand, reaching out toward the empty space in front of me, and began speaking directly to my late wife. "Brenda," I whispered in a raspy, utterly broken voice. "Brenda, did you remember to lock the front gate? The workers are leaving the construction site, and we need to secure the heavy machinery before it rains." My voice wavered perfectly, carrying the hollow, deeply tragic tone of a man whose mind was completely lost in a fabricated past. Megan covered her mouth, fighting back a cruel, extremely satisfied smirk. Anthony nodded approvingly at the ridiculous spectacle. The impatient fake doctor did not even bother asking a single solitary follow-up question or attempting to bring me back to reality. He simply nodded his head, pretending to look gravely concerned, and aggressively scribbled his forged signature across the bottom of the final medical declaration. He boldly stamped the paperwork with a fake medical seal that he had illegally purchased, officially diagnosing me with severe late-stage dementia. He confidently handed the fully executed, highly illegal documents directly to Anthony, sealing my fake medical fate forever, giving them exactly what they needed to sell my home. As soon as the fraudulent paperwork was completed, Anthony grabbed my arm and roughly shoved me back into my cramped storage closet, locking the door behind me. However, I immediately dropped to my hands and knees and peered through the narrow, unsealed gap at the bottom of the door frame. I pulled out my secret smartphone and activated the camera, angling the lens perfectly to capture the illuminated hallway. Connor walked the fake physician toward the front exit, completely unaware that my high-definition camera was silently recording their every move. I watched through the digital screen as Connor pulled a thick, bulging white envelope from his tailored jacket pocket. He shoved the massive stack of untraceable cash directly into the fraudster's greedy hands. "Thank you for doing this quickly, Connor," whispered loudly, his voice echoing down the hall. "That is exactly $2,000 in pure cash, just like we agreed. Do not ever contact me again." The fake doctor grinned, pocketing the illicit bribe money before slipping out into the humid Atlanta afternoon. I stopped recording and smiled in the dark. That cash bribe was the final nail in their criminal coffin, cementing the massive federal conspiracy charge. That very evening, the atmosphere inside the house shifted from anxious desperation to electric, unbridled celebration. I remained slumped in the corner of the living room, keeping my chin tucked firmly against my chest, playing the role of the heavily medicated patient while my children gathered around the kitchen island. Anthony walked into the room holding a sleek, silver-embossed envelope, waving it through the air like a conquering general returning with the spoils of war. His chest was puffed out, and a massive, arrogant grin dominated his features. He slammed the elegant envelope down onto the granite countertop, demanding everyone's absolute attention. Connor and Monique rushed over, their eyes gleaming with unchecked greed. Anthony cleared his throat and proudly announced that the commercial developers had officially reviewed the fraudulent medical affidavit we secured earlier that afternoon. The corrupt paperwork had completely satisfied their legal department. Because of that, the developers were not just going to send a quiet wire transfer. They were hosting a massive, highly publicized real estate gala downtown this coming Friday night. The extravagant event was designed to celebrate the rapid gentrification of the entire district, and the absolute highlight of the evening would be the ceremonial signing of our property transfer right on the main stage. Anthony boasted that the billionaire chief executive officer of the development firm personally requested his presence to finalize the $1.5 million purchase in front of hundreds of wealthy investors and local media outlets. Connor let out a loud, triumphant shout, slapping Anthony aggressively on the back. Monique poured massive glasses of expensive champagne, toasting to their imminent financial salvation. They discussed how this massive public spectacle would instantly validate their new status among the city elite. The staggering sum of $1.5 million would be officially transferred into a joint account controlled exclusively by Anthony by the end of the night. They were entirely convinced that their dark, murderous conspiracy had been perfectly executed. The sheer arrogance radiating from Anthony was absolutely nauseating. He genuinely believed he had successfully outsmarted the strict legal system, the medical establishment, and his own father. He stood in my kitchen loudly bragging about the luxurious vacations and expensive cars he was going to purchase with the blood money, completely oblivious to the fact that I was actively listening. As the four of them continued to drink and celebrate their incoming fortune, the conversation took a significantly more twisted and disturbing turn. Megan leaned against the polished granite counter, swirling the pale champagne in her elegant crystal flute. A dark, manipulative spark ignited in her eyes as she stared directly at my slumped, supposedly paralyzed body sitting in the dimly lit corner. "I have an absolutely brilliant idea for the gala," she announced smoothly, cutting through the loud, boisterous laughter of her husband and sister-in-law. Everyone turned their attention toward her, instantly captivated by the sinister tone of her voice. Megan set her delicate glass down and smiled wickedly. "We should not just attend this massive real estate event by ourselves. We need to bring Gregory along with us. We should rent a medical wheelchair, dress him up in a sad, oversized suit, and push him right into the very center of the grand ballroom for everyone to witness." Connor frowned in deep confusion, shaking his head. "Are you entirely out of your mind, Megan? Why on earth would we drag the miserable old man to a glamorous high society party? He will just drool on himself and completely ruin the upscale aesthetic we are trying to project to these wealthy developers. We are celebrating, not running a cheap charity ward." Megan rolled her eyes in sheer exasperation, clicking her tongue as if explaining a basic concept to a dense child. "You are not thinking about the public relations angle, Connor. This is brilliant PR for the corporate developers and for us. Just imagine the incredibly powerful optics of the situation. The entire city press corps will be there documenting the massive land acquisition. If we push a fragile, severely demented father onto that brightly lit stage, we control the entire narrative. We will look like the ultimate, heroic, self-sacrificing family who is desperately selling their beloved childhood home solely to afford round-the-clock medical care for our tragic, senile father." Anthony's face instantly lit up with a profound, sickening realization. He slammed his hand on the counter in total agreement. "She is completely right, Connor. The billionaire chief executive officer will absolutely love the optics of a heartwarming family tragedy. It gives their aggressive gentrification project a deeply compassionate human element. They will frame the million-dollar purchase as a noble rescue mission rather than a hostile corporate takeover. We will be praised by every single news outlet in Atlanta." Monique clapped her hands together in sheer delight, entirely thrilled by the disgusting prospect of exploiting my fabricated illness for her own social elevation. "Yes," Monique squealed loudly. "We will look so incredibly generous and loving. We can even shed a few fake tears for the cameras when they hand Anthony the giant ceremonial check. I will buy a modest black dress to look sorrowful. The entire room immediately erupted into a disgusting chorus of enthusiastic agreement, completely intoxicated by their own sheer brilliance. Hearing their sinister, deeply manipulative plan unfold right in front of me required every single ounce of my immense willpower to remain perfectly still. I forced my body to tremble violently, letting out a soft, pathetic whimper of apparent confusion. I cowered deeper into the dark corner of the living room, acting completely terrified at the mere mention of a medical wheelchair and bright camera lights. I let my jaw hang loose, staring blankly at the floorboards as if I were utterly horrified by the loud, aggressive voices echoing around the kitchen island. Anthony walked over and patted my shoulder with disgusting fake affection, promising me that everything was going to be perfectly fine. I nodded weakly, playing the role of the shattered, obedient victim flawlessly. But internally, beneath my blank and vacant stare, my blood was absolutely rushing with pure electric adrenaline. I was not terrified of the upcoming downtown real estate gala. I was utterly thrilled. These greedy, arrogant fools thought they were cleverly utilizing my fabricated illness as a convenient theatrical prop to guarantee their fraudulent million-dollar payout. They had no idea they were actively constructing the exact massive, highly publicized scaffold I desperately needed for their ultimate humiliating execution. They were intentionally gathering the most powerful corporate executives, the wealthiest private investors, and the entire local media press corps all into one single brightly lit room. It was the absolute perfect, inescapable trap. By aggressively forcing me onto that grand ballroom stage, they were unwittingly handing me the ultimate microphone to completely destroy their miserable, deceitful lives. I sat quietly in the shadows, counting down the hours until Friday night. Their spectacular and absolute downfall was now permanently guaranteed, and I was definitely going to enjoy every single second of their complete public destruction. The highly anticipated morning of the spectacular downtown real estate gala finally arrived. A frantic, nervous energy consumed the entire house before the sun even fully crested the horizon. Anthony, Megan, Monique, and Connor were entirely preoccupied with their own vanity, rushing out the front door to attend various exclusive salon appointments and luxury boutique fittings. They loudly claimed they needed to look absolutely perfect for the flashing media cameras that evening. The absolute second the heavy front deadbolt clicked shut, sealing them outside, my helpless, elderly facade immediately vanished. I stood up from my cramped mattress, completely energized by the righteous vengeance coursing through my veins, and pulled my hidden smartphone from beneath the dusty floorboards. I dialed the direct secure line to my trusted attorney, Robert Harrington. He answered on the very first ring, his voice crisp and strictly professional. The legal fortress is completely assembled. Gregory, Robert announced with a distinct tone of triumph. I smiled, feeling a massive, invisible weight lift off my tired shoulders. Robert confirmed that the complex legal paperwork for the irrevocable trust had been successfully filed and completely expedited through the state courts early this morning. The staggering $8 million in pure liquid assets held within my secret limited liability company was now permanently locked away behind an impenetrable legal wall. Furthermore, the official property deed to the very Atlanta house my treacherous children were plotting to sell had been legally transferred directly into the absolute protection of that exact same trust. My greedy son and his arrogant accomplices were operating under the massive delusion that they held a valid power of attorney to liquidate my entire estate. They were blissfully unaware that the fraudulent document they possessed was now entirely worthless. It held absolutely zero legal authority over assets that technically no longer belonged to my individual name. I was completely bulletproof. Everything I had painstakingly built over 4 decades of backbreaking construction work was safely insulated from their desperate, grasping hands. "Excellent work, Robert," I replied smoothly, pacing across the quiet living room. "They are forcing me to attend the corporate event tonight in a medical wheelchair. They think they are parading a broken victim. We will let them march proudly onto that grand stage, and then we will completely pull the floor right out from underneath them now." With the monumental real estate assets securely shielded from my thieving family, I immediately pivoted to the second phase of my aggressive morning counterattack. I needed to systematically sever their daily financial lifelines before they could steal another single dollar of my personal retirement money. Sitting at the dark granite kitchen island where I had secretly filmed Megan committing her blatant midnight forgery, I logged into my primary banking portal using my hidden smartphone. I navigated directly to the Security and Fraud Prevention Department dashboard. My heart pounded with cold, calculated precision as I quickly dialed the 24-hour emergency hotline for premium account holders. A polite professional representative answered, inquiring how he could assist me. I identified myself using my secure verification pins and spoke in a firm, authoritative tone that completely betrayed my fabricated senile persona. I suspect massive, ongoing fraudulent activity across my entire personal financial portfolio, I declared smoothly. I need you to immediately freeze every single visible checking and savings account linked to my Social Security number. Do not allow any outbound wire transfers, cash withdrawals, or new check clearances under any circumstances until I personally visit a local branch with physical identification. The representative gasped slightly, clearly alarmed by the severity of my urgent request. He rapidly typed across his keyboard, executing my strict commands in real time. Done, sir, he confirmed respectfully. Your primary accounts are now completely locked down tight. Next, I moved on to the most satisfying part of the phone call. I instructed the representative to permanently cancel all 5 of the major credit cards that my malicious daughter-in-law had illegally obtained by stealing my identity. Megan had been aggressively financing her lavish designer lifestyle using my flawless credit score, racking up tens of thousands of dollars in unauthorized luxury purchases. Cancel those specific cards immediately and mark them as severely compromised by malicious identity theft, I ordered coldly. Any attempted transaction moving forward must be instantly declined at the point of sale. The bank employee swiftly complied, officially terminating her endless supply of stolen money. The invisible financial guillotine dropped with a resounding, completely satisfying thud. My children and their greedy spouses were now operating completely blind. They were totally cut off from the stolen cash flow they desperately relied upon to fund their pathetic, fake aristocratic lives, starting right this very second in our city. I carefully stashed my phone back under the loose floorboards just minutes before the heavy front door violently swung open. Megan stormed into the entryway like a hurricane, completely failing to maintain the poised, elegant image she so desperately tried to project to the outside world. Her face was flushed bright red with pure, unadulterated embarrassment and sheer fury. She aggressively hurled her car keys onto the hallway console table, the loud metallic crash echoing sharply through the quiet house. Anthony walked in right behind her, hastily loosening his silk tie while trying to calm her down. I cannot believe the sheer humiliation I just endured at that luxury boutique, Megan screamed, pacing aggressively back and forth across the hardwood floor. I was standing right at the main checkout register in front of 3 other wealthy wives from the neighborhood. I went to swipe the premium platinum card to pay for the $2,000 designer handbag I selected specifically for tonight, and the sales clerk looked at me like I was a common street criminal. The machine blatantly declined the transaction. It flashed a massive fraud alert directly on the screen in bright red letters. Anthony sighed heavily, rubbing his temples in utter frustration. He clearly did not want to deal with his wife's petty, materialistic meltdowns when they were mere hours away from finalizing their massive corporate real estate payout. Megan, you need to lower your voice and significantly calm down right now, Anthony commanded sharply. It is obviously just an automated bank fraud alert glitch. The bank algorithm probably flagged the unusually high purchase amount because we have been aggressively charging massive expenses to that specific account all week long. Megan crossed her arms, her jaw tightly clenched in intense anger. I looked like a broke beggar, Anthony. They practically chased me out of the store. Anthony grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to look directly into his greedy, calculating eyes. Listen to me, he whispered forcefully. None of this temporary plastic credit garbage matters. By midnight tonight, we will have a certified cashier's check for $1.5 million. I will personally call the bank tomorrow morning, verify the identity details, and completely clear the ridiculous fraud alert. We just need to physically get the old man to the grand gala and sign the developer contract. The payout fixes absolutely everything we deeply need right now. The cool evening air of downtown Atlanta hit my face as Anthony aggressively shoved my medical wheelchair out of the rented luxury transport van. We had officially arrived at the 5-star hotel hosting the grand real estate gala. The towering glass facade of the building was brilliantly illuminated, casting a golden glow over the red carpet rolled out for the wealthy investors. As Megan aggressively pushed my chair toward the massive revolving doors, the blinding flash of media cameras immediately assaulted my vision. Local journalists and high society photographers swarmed the entrance, eager to capture the arrival of the city elite. I let my head slump forward, resting my chin heavily against my chest, playing the role of the broken, senile prop to absolute perfection. They had deliberately forced me into an incredibly dusty, severely oversized gray suit they dug out of the darkest corner of the attic. The jacket hung off my shoulders like a cheap garbage bag, making me look dangerously frail and completely pathetic. It was a highly calculated wardrobe choice designed specifically to maximize public sympathy and validate their fabricated tragedy. We rolled into the spectacular grand ballroom, and the sheer extravagance of the event was genuinely breathtaking. Towering crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceilings, casting a warm, sparkling light over hundreds of sharply dressed attendees. Waiters in immaculate white tuxedos glided flawlessly through the dense crowd, balancing silver trays piled high with delicate crystal champagne flutes and expensive hors d'oeuvres. A soft, elegant string quartet played in the background, completely drowned out by the loud, boastful chatter of powerful corporate executives and ambitious property developers. My treacherous family instantly transformed the second we crossed the threshold. They plastered massive, dazzling smiles across their deceitful faces, completely hiding the immense financial terror secretly eating them alive. Anthony stood incredibly tall, adjusting his perfectly tailored designer suit jacket, trying desperately to project the false image of a highly successful, wealthy heir. Connor puffed out his chest, attempting to mask his deep, crippling bankruptcy with sheer, arrogant posture. They aggressively pushed my heavy wheelchair directly into the thickest part of the glamorous crowd, shamelessly parading my supposedly ruined body for everyone to witness. I kept my eyes completely vacant, staring blankly at the polished marble floor, secretly savoring the electric anticipation of their impending public slaughter. Anthony quickly grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing waiter and immediately began working the massive ballroom with practiced, sickening charm. Megan gripped his arm tightly, parading her fake smile as they seamlessly infiltrated a tight circle of prominent Atlanta property moguls. Monique and Connor mirrored their aggressive networking strategy perfectly on the opposite side of the sprawling venue. They loudly introduced themselves to anyone wearing an expensive watch or carrying a high-level media press pass. They were desperately attempting to lay the crucial groundwork for their fake aristocratic reputations before the massive $1 million check was officially handed over. Megan practically shoved her way toward the front of the room where the most powerful corporate figures were gathered. She forcefully dragged my wheelchair along with her, carelessly bumping the heavy metal footrests against several annoyed guests without offering a single sincere apology. She was entirely focused on a tall, imposing man surrounded by a dense entourage of nervous legal aides and fast-talking executives. It was the billionaire chief executive officer of the massive development firm that was supposedly buying my land. The man possessed a formidable presence, wearing a sharp charcoal suit and carrying an aura of absolute, undisputed authority. Anthony smoothly intercepted the executive, extending his hand with a bright, overconfident grin. "It is an absolute honor to finally meet you in person, Sir," Anthony said, projecting a fake booming voice designed to attract maximum attention from the nearby journalists. "I am Anthony Hollis, and we are incredibly thrilled to finalize this historic neighborhood development deal with your prestigious company tonight." The powerful billionaire turned his sharp gaze toward Anthony, his expression initially neutral and calculating. He firmly shook my son's hand briefly, glancing over the eager, desperate faces of Connor, Monique, and Megan, who had quickly crowded around him like starving vultures. "I appreciate your swift cooperation in this vital acquisition," Anthony, the chief executive officer, replied in a deep, commanding tone. "We are rapidly expanding this entire district, and securing your family corner lot was absolutely critical to our master blueprint." He then lowered his gaze, peering directly over Anthony's tailored shoulder. His sharp eyes landed squarely on my slumped, pathetic figure sitting quietly in the dusty medical wheelchair. The billionaire's stern corporate expression instantly softened, entirely captivated by the deeply tragic visual my greedy children had so meticulously orchestrated for everyone tonight. The towering billionaire chief executive officer gracefully stepped away from his protective entourage and walked directly toward my parked wheelchair. He leaned forward, gazing down at my intentionally blank, unresponsive face with a look of profound, genuine pity. He gently reached out and patted my frail shoulder with a remarkably condescending but well-meaning touch. I kept my head perfectly still, staring aimlessly at his polished Italian leather shoes while forcing my jaw to hang slightly loose. It took every single ounce of my immense willpower to avoid smacking his heavy hand completely away from my body. The executive slowly stood back up and turned his sharp attention directly to Anthony, his voice carrying a tone of deep, uncharacteristic reverence. "Your absolute dedication to your ailing father is deeply inspiring," Anthony, the powerful billionaire, declared loudly, ensuring the nearby journalists captured every single word. "Liquidating such a valuable family asset just to fund his round-the-clock medical care truly shows your exceptional personal character. Most young men in your highly demanding corporate position would have simply abandoned him to a cheap state facility long ago. You are an incredibly honorable son." The sheer, unadulterated hypocrisy of that statement practically burned a hole completely through my chest. Anthony instantly seized the dramatic opportunity to elevate his fake public persona. He slowly lowered his head, pinching the bridge of his nose as if he were heroically fighting back a massive wave of overwhelming emotional grief. He let out a loud, shuddering sigh and wiped a non-existent tear from the corner of his deceitful eye. "It is the absolute least I can do for him," Sir Anthony replied in a perfectly trembling, sorrowful whisper. "My beloved father sacrificed his entire life to provide for us. Making this deeply painful financial decision to ensure his ultimate comfort is a heavy burden, but it is my sacred, unbreakable duty as his loyal son." Monique aggressively wrapped her arm around Anthony, resting her head on his shoulder to perfectly complete the sickening family portrait. Megan and Connor stood right behind them, nodding solemnly for the flashing camera lenses. The surrounding crowd of wealthy elite investors murmured their collective approval, completely captivated by the beautiful fabricated lie. They had no idea they were actively applauding 4 ruthless, cold-blooded criminals who had recently attempted to murder me in absolute cold blood just a few short weeks ago. The ambient chatter of the grand ballroom was abruptly silenced as the towering crystal chandeliers slowly dimmed to a soft, dramatic glow. A massive high-definition projector screen illuminated the wall behind the main podium, displaying the sleek modern logo of the billionaire development firm. The string quartet stopped playing, replaced by the commanding voice of the master of ceremonies, echoing through the state-of-the-art sound system. He requested that all guests direct their attention to the front of the room for the most anticipated moment of the evening. The powerful chief executive officer stepped up to the polished glass podium, adjusting his microphone with practiced authority. A hushed electric anticipation fell over the wealthy crowd of investors and local politicians. The chief executive officer smiled warmly, gazing out over the sea of expensive suits and sparkling evening gowns. "Tonight we are not just celebrating a simple corporate land acquisition," he began, his voice resonating with deep manufactured sincerity. "We are officially breaking ground on a monumental, revitalizing project that will completely change the neighborhood forever. We are bringing unprecedented luxury modern infrastructure and robust economic growth to a district that has been severely neglected for decades." The crowd erupted into thunderous polite applause, completely oblivious to the fact that his grand vision required bulldozing the very foundation of my entire life. The chief executive officer raised his hand, signaling for absolute quiet. But this historic project would not be possible without the incredible cooperation and profound sacrifice of one specific local family. He continued, sweeping his arm toward the front row. They quickly recognized the immense value of our bold urban vision and made the deeply difficult, highly emotional decision to surrender their beloved generational property to secure specialized medical care for their ailing patriarch. It is a stunning display of modern family devotion. Please, ladies and gentlemen, join me right now in giving a massive, heartfelt round of applause to the honorable men who made this massive neighborhood transformation a reality. I invite Anthony Hollis and his brother-in-law Connor up to the stage to officially execute the final transfer documents. Anthony aggressively straightened his silk tie, flashing a brilliantly fake, humble smile. Connor practically leaped out of his seat, unable to contain his greedy, desperate excitement as they marched toward the brightly lit stage. As Anthony and Connor proudly took their designated places beside the powerful billionaire at the polished glass podium, the confident chief executive officer gestured broadly toward the front row of VIP tables. "We also want to officially recognize the incredibly brave man who provided the very foundation for this historic neighborhood," the executive proclaimed loudly into the microphone. "Please bring him up here right now so we can properly honor his immense legacy." That was the exact, highly anticipated, predetermined signal Megan had been waiting for all evening. She forcefully grabbed the heavy black rubber handles of my rented hospital medical wheelchair and began pushing me directly toward the brightly lit stage. The thick black wheels bumped harshly against the steep, carpeted ramp as she aggressively propelled me upward into the blinding glare of the media spotlights. Every single camera lens in the massive ballroom instantly pivoted to focus entirely on my slumped, pathetic figure. I kept my chin tucked tightly against my chest, playing the role of the shattered, completely oblivious prop to absolute perfection. The incredibly dusty, severely oversized gray suit draped over my shoulders made me look dangerously frail, a hollow shell of the strong construction contractor I truly was. Megan maneuvered my heavy chair right to the absolute center of the wide stage, forcefully locking the wheel brakes with a sharp click. She positioned me squarely in front of the bright, flashing camera strobes, ensuring my supposedly ruined body was displayed perfectly alongside her grinning husband and the arrogant billionaire. The eager local journalists began snapping photographs, rapidly capturing the highly fabricated, incredibly manipulative family portrait designed to sell their ruthless corporate narrative. Monique had quickly followed us onto the stage, clutching her expensive designer purse and delicately dabbing her dry eyes with a pristine white tissue, pretending to be utterly overcome with profound emotional grief. Connor stood rigidly behind the small signing table, his eyes locked greedily onto the thick leather portfolio containing the final legal contracts and the certified cashier's check worth $1.5 million. He was practically vibrating with intense financial desperation, completely ready to seize the massive payout that would save his legs from the violent underworld loan sharks. Megan stood proudly behind my wheelchair, resting her perfectly manicured hands on my sagging shoulders, projecting the sickening, completely false image of a deeply compassionate and tirelessly devoted daughter-in-law. The master of ceremonies instructed Anthony to step forward and finalize the monumental transaction. The billionaire chief executive officer pulled a gleaming solid gold fountain pen from his breast pocket and ceremoniously laid it across the polished oak table directly next to the binding contracts. Anthony confidently strode over to the designated spot, buttoning his tailored suit jacket with a sickeningly arrogant flair. He eagerly grabbed the heavy polished golden pen, his knuckles turning slightly white as he aggressively pressed the expensive black ink down onto the thick binding parchment. With 3 swift, incredibly aggressive strokes, he permanently signed away the precious, beautiful home I had painstakingly built, completely unaware that his fraudulent signature was actually securing absolutely nothing tonight. As the final ink dried, the executive handed Anthony an oversized ceremonial novelty check printed with the staggering sum of $1.5 million. The entire massive ballroom immediately erupted into deafening applause, validating the horrific deception they had ruthlessly orchestrated. Connor practically vibrated out of his expensive tailored shoes, staring wildly at the massive cardboard check like a desperate, starving predator finally staring at a fresh, bloody kill. The blinding camera flashes intensified, bathing the entire stage in a relentless, chaotic strobe light. The chief executive officer smiled warmly, clapping Anthony firmly on the shoulder before gesturing toward my stationary wheelchair. "Give your brave father a loving hug for the front page tomorrow," the billionaire instructed, cheerfully, completely oblivious to the dark, murderous reality standing right beside him. Anthony immediately obliged, the CEO walking smoothly and purposefully toward my slumped, seemingly incapacitated figure. He dropped dramatically onto one knee directly in front of my medical chair, ensuring his handsome, perfectly styled profile was optimally angled for the waiting photographers. He wrapped his strong arms aggressively around my fragile, bony shoulders, pulling my torso forward into a tight, incredibly suffocating embrace. To the wealthy investors and local press corps watching from the packed audience, it looked like a beautiful, deeply touching moment of pure familial devotion between a highly dedicated son and his tragically fading patriarch. As Anthony bends down to pretend to hug his father for the cameras, he whispers venomously into my ear, his hot breath carrying the sharp stench of expensive champagne and ruthless greed. "Smile, old man. This check pays my debts and buys you a locked door in the cheapest madhouse in the state." The relentless flashing of the media cameras continued to bathe the grand stage in a blinding, chaotic strobe light. Anthony held his suffocating fake embrace for a few more seconds, ensuring the local journalists captured the perfect image of his fabricated devotion. He slowly pulled back, keeping his hands firmly planted on my frail shoulders, and waited for me to produce the pathetic, drooling smile they expected from a broken man. But I did not smile. I did not slump forward or let my eyes roll vacantly toward the polished stage floor. Instead, I slowly lifted my head, meeting his arrogant, greedy gaze with a look of absolute razor-sharp clarity. The wicked, triumphant smirk instantly vanished from Anthony's face as he stared into my cold, completely lucid eyes. He opened his mouth to speak, but the sudden realization paralyzed his vocal cords. Without breaking eye contact, I reached down with perfectly steady hands. My fingers grasped the heavy black nylon safety strap that Megan had tightly fastened across my waist to keep me secured in the medical wheelchair. With a swift, deliberate, and incredibly loud click, I unbuckled the restrictive belt. I let the heavy plastic buckle fall against the metal frame of the chair. Anthony instinctively took a half-step backward, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated terror as he watched his perfectly constructed narrative begin to violently unravel. I gripped the hard rubber armrests of the wheelchair, pushing down with the immense physical strength I had built over 40 years of grueling construction work. I lifted my body upward. I did not tremble. I did not hesitate. I rose from the dusty, oversized suit they had forced me into and stood up perfectly straight. My spine aligned, my shoulders squared, and I towered over the medical prop they thought would be my permanent cage. I was no longer the helpless, senile victim they had aggressively dragged onto this public stage. I was Gregory Hollis, a powerful, self-made man, and I was fully prepared to burn their entire fraudulent empire completely to the ground, right here in front of the entire city. My sudden commanding posture visibly shattered the carefully manufactured illusion they had desperately sold to the eager media audience waiting eagerly below the raised platform tonight to witness a highly emotional, tragic family sacrifice event. A collective gasp echoed sharply through the sprawling grand ballroom. The sudden unified intake of breath from hundreds of wealthy investors and prominent local journalists sounded like a massive vacuum sucking all the oxygen directly out of the massive space. The lively, polite murmurs of high society attendees instantly died, replaced by an incredibly thick, suffocating wall of absolute silence. Every single camera lens remained pointed squarely at the brightly lit stage, capturing the precise moment their heartbreaking family tragedy completely imploded. Anthony stumbled backward as if he had just been physically struck by a massive, invisible battering ram. The golden ceremonial fountain pen, the exact expensive instrument he was supposed to use to sign away my entire life savings, slipped through his visibly trembling fingers. It hit the polished oak podium with a loud metallic clatter and rolled aggressively onto the stage floor, spinning directly toward the edge before dropping out of sight. The color aggressively drained from Anthony's face, leaving him looking like a terrified, cornered animal caught squarely in the blinding headlights of an approaching freight train. He raised his shaking hands defensively, his mouth opening and closing silently as he struggled desperately to process the terrifying reality standing tall right in front of him. Behind my empty wheelchair, Megan froze completely solid. Her meticulously manicured hands remained hovering awkwardly in the empty air where my frail shoulders had been just seconds before. Her perfectly practiced, sympathetic smile melted instantly into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. She blinked rapidly, her eyes darting frantically between my tall, commanding figure and the massive crowd of powerful executives watching them with growing confusion. Monique, who had been loudly performing her fake sobbing routine for the front row cameras, abruptly stopped. She lowered her pristine white tissue, her jaw dropping open in sheer panic as she realized the massive fraud was rapidly unraveling. Connor stood completely rigid behind the presentation table, his greedy eyes locked onto the oversized cardboard check worth $1.5 million. He looked absolutely sick to his stomach, recognizing that his crucial financial lifeline to escape the violent underground loan sharks had just vanished. The billionaire chief executive officer took a highly cautious step away from my treacherous son, his stern corporate expression twisting into deep, suspicious confusion as he watched my sudden, miraculous transformation unfold perfectly before his very eyes today on stage now. I did not give them a single second to recover their composure or attempt to salvage their thoroughly destroyed public narrative. Leaving the discarded medical wheelchair entirely behind me, I walked with terrifying, unyielding authority directly toward the polished glass podium located at the absolute center of the brightly lit stage. Every heavy, deliberate footstep I took resonated with the immense, undeniable power of a man who had successfully outsmarted his predators. Connor was standing right beside the microphone stand, clutching the metal pole, defensively, shaking like a fragile leaf caught in a brutal hurricane. I approached him, staring so fiercely into his terrified eyes that he physically shrank away from my imposing presence. Without saying a single word to him, I forcefully snatched the wireless microphone directly out of his visibly trembling hand. He did not even attempt to resist my aggressive motion. I turned my broad shoulders to face the vast sea of wealthy investors, powerful developers, and eager journalists watching the unprecedented drama unfold from the ballroom floor. The entire venue remained completely paralyzed in total breathtaking silence. I raised the microphone to my lips. My voice, which they falsely claimed was severely deteriorated by advanced dementia, boomed through the state-of-the-art sound system, echoing with deep, resonating clarity across the massive hall. "I am not senile," I declared forcefully, letting the absolute truth pierce the heavy silence of the shocked audience. "I am not crippled." The cameras flashed aggressively, capturing the astonishing sight of the supposedly dying patriarch commanding the entire prestigious corporate gala. I slowly turned my head, glaring directly at Anthony, Megan, Connor, and Monique, who were cowering together on the stage like exposed, terrified criminals. "But my children are severely crippled in their humanity." I continued, my voice dripping with cold, righteous condemnation. "They aggressively dragged me into this room tonight to parade me like a pathetic, broken circus animal. They desperately wanted to use my fabricated illness to collect a massive corporate payout and finance their pathetic, bankrupt lives. They smiled for your cameras and collected your generous praises while secretly waiting for me to rot in a cheap public asylum. They entirely thought I was completely deaf and completely blind to their dark, sinister, murderous schemes. But they were absolutely catastrophically wrong about me today, because I know absolutely every single terrible detail they violently planned to do perfectly." I kept my firm grip on the microphone, letting the heavy, undeniable truth of my words settle over the massive ballroom. The wealthy investors and prominent media members stared at me in total silence, completely captivated by the sudden dramatic shift in reality. I slowly turned my head away from my terrified family members cowering on the brightly lit stage. I looked directly upward past the towering crystal chandeliers, focusing my sharp gaze onto the tinted glass window of the elevated audio-visual control booth, located at the very back of the expansive room. Standing perfectly still behind the seated hotel sound engineer was my brilliant, trusted attorney, Robert Harrington. He was wearing a sharp navy blue suit, his arms crossed confidently across his chest. He had arrived an hour early to secure the technical advantage we desperately needed for this precise moment. Through the thick glass, I could see the intense, determined gleam in his eyes. He had successfully bypassed the hotel management, likely using a combination of his intimidating legal authority and a highly generous cash incentive to temporarily commandeer the sophisticated soundboard. Robert was watching my every single move with absolute precision, waiting for my signal. I did not blink. I simply offered him a single, barely perceptible yet incredibly deliberate nod. It was the silent command we had meticulously planned during our secret downtown meeting. Robert instantly uncrossed his arms and placed his hand firmly on the sound engineer's shoulder, giving the technician the ultimate green light. The grand ballroom remained completely hushed, the audience holding their collective breath, totally unaware of the devastating audio exhibit that was about to rain down upon them and permanently destroy my highly treacherous family members tonight and forever. A sudden, sharp crackle of static erupted from the massive overhead speakers, startling the captive audience and completely shattering the tense quiet. The sophisticated surround sound system, typically reserved for elegant symphonies and smooth corporate presentations, was abruptly hijacked by a raw, unedited, and incredibly sinister audio recording. The unmistakable sound of an intense, hushed argument echoed violently across the sprawling five-star ballroom, bouncing off the towering crystal chandeliers and vibrating right through the polished marble floors. Connor's frantic, venomous voice blasted outward at maximum volume, his distinct tone easily recognizable to anyone who had spoken with him during the extravagant cocktail hour. "Sign the damn paper fast. As soon as that doctor gets back," Anthony Connor's recorded voice roared, dripping with pure, unadulterated malice. "I do not want any sudden miracles today. We cannot afford any mistakes. We are entirely too incredibly close to the finish line to let him pull through now." The wealthy investors in the front row physically flinched, their champagne flutes trembling in their manicured hands as the horrific reality of the audio file began to fully register. But the true devastating blow was yet to come. The recording continued broadcasting the darkest, most terrifying secret my family possessed directly to the entire city press corps. Last night, when the old man clutched his chest and hit the living room floor, Monique and I were standing right there. Connor's cruel voice continued to echo relentlessly throughout the massive hall. We watched him gasp for air. We watched his face turn gray. Do you know what we did? We did absolutely nothing. We deliberately waited 45 agonizing minutes to call emergency services just to make sure he was done for. We sat on your expensive couch and watched him struggle to breathe until his eyes rolled back. Do not let my extreme effort go to waste. A collective visceral wave of sheer horror crashed over the high society crowd. Several prominent socialites openly gasped aggressively, covering their mouths in absolute shock as the explicit confession of premeditated murder filled the expansive room. The esteemed local journalists instantly raised their digital cameras, rapidly capturing the unfolding chaos. Anthony's recorded voice then chimed in cold and ruthlessly pragmatic. We force the old man into the miserable psychiatric ward, we sell this dusty brick house to the greedy developers, and we quietly split the massive payout right down the middle. $1.5 million is more than enough to silence your violent loan sharks and satisfy my corporate auditors. The entire grand ballroom recoiled in sheer, absolute horror. The beautiful, compassionate narrative my children had so meticulously crafted was instantly and permanently obliterated, violently replaced by the naked, undeniable truth of their monstrous greed. Every single wealthy guest, every powerful local politician, and every eager media reporter now knew exactly who these uniquely despicable people truly were tonight. The devastating audio exhibit had successfully detonated, completely leveling their entire fraudulent existence right here today and forever. Complete and utter pandemonium instantly violently erupted across the brightly lit stage. Connor's face contorted into a mask of pure, unadulterated terror as his own voice continued to echo mercilessly through the high-definition speakers. "Cut the damn microphone," he screamed hysterically, lunging desperately toward the massive audio cables running along the back wall. "Turn the sound off right now." He clawed frantically at the thick black wires, but the expert hotel technical crew standing securely behind the locked glass door of the AV booth with Robert completely ignored his furious, pathetic commands. Megan let out a shrill, piercing shriek of absolute panic. Realizing the devastating severity of their public exposure, she immediately abandoned her husband and sprinted toward the side exit of the grand stage. Her expensive designer heels slipped precariously on the smooth, polished floorboards, sending her crashing hard onto her knees in front of dozens of flashing cameras. She scrambled pathetically on the ground, frantically trying to hide her face behind her glittering stolen handbag. The billionaire chief executive officer, previously the proud sponsor of this monumental gentrification project, reacted with swift, brutal disgust. He took 3 large, aggressive steps completely away from Anthony, staring at my treacherous son as if he had just been diagnosed with a highly contagious flesh-eating plague. His stern corporate expression violently twisted into a deep, visceral grimace of profound revulsion. "Do not ever come anywhere near me or my firm again." The powerful executive spat viciously, wiping his right hand aggressively against his custom-tailored trousers as if he desperately needed to scrub off the physical taint of Anthony's handshake. "This real estate deal is completely terminated, and my corporate attorneys will be contacting the federal authorities immediately." Anthony dropped to his knees, his perfectly constructed world totally shattered. He buried his face in his trembling hands, openly sobbing, as the massive crowd below loudly booed and relentlessly mocked their catastrophic downfall. Monique collapsed against the presentation table, letting out a genuine horrifying wail as the reality of her impending imprisonment finally crashed over her tonight. The local media reporters aggressively pushed closer to the stage, their powerful camera flashes illuminating the pathetic crumbling ruins of my malicious family. Every single attempt they made to shield their crying faces from the public spotlight was completely useless. I stood perfectly tall, thoroughly enjoying their absolute and truly devastating permanent public destruction. The devastating audio exhibit was only the first wave of my relentless counterattack. As Connor continued to claw uselessly at the soundboard cables, and Megan scrambled pathetically on her knees, the massive high-definition projector screen dominating the back wall of the grand stage suddenly flickered to life. The towering crystal chandeliers remained dim, allowing the giant, brilliantly illuminated digital display to command the absolute attention of every single wealthy investor and journalist in the room. A crisp, crystal-clear 4,000-pixel video began to play in stunning, undeniable detail. The towering screen displayed the pitch-black hallway of my own home perfectly angled through the narrow crack of my kitchen door. There, illuminated brightly by a small flashlight clamped aggressively between her teeth, was Megan. The high society crowd watched in absolute silence as my malicious daughter-in-law meticulously practiced forging my signature onto the retirement checks. The high-definition lens captured her greedy, calculating smirk perfectly as she aggressively stuffed the fraudulent documents deep into her expensive designer purse. Megan let out a horrific, blood-curdling scream, burying her face into the polished stage floorboards as her undeniable federal crimes were broadcasted to the entire city elite. Before the shocked audience could even process her blatant financial forgery, the massive screen abruptly switched to a second, equally damning video file. This new footage showcased the brightly lit hallway outside my dusty storage closet. Connor was standing right there, arrogantly shaking hands with the fake medical professional they had hired to falsely declare me mentally incompetent. The digital video zoomed in seamlessly, capturing the exact undeniable moment Connor pulled a thick, bulging white envelope from his tailored jacket pocket. The audio picked up his distinct voice echoing clearly down the hall. "Thank you for doing this quickly," Connor whispered on the giant screen. "That is exactly $2,000 in pure cash, just like we agreed. Do not ever contact me again." The fake medical doctor grinned, pocketing the illicit bribe money before slipping out the front door. The entire ballroom erupted into another massive wave of disgusted gasps and furious murmurs. The absolute visual confirmation of their dark, twisted medical conspiracy was entirely undeniable. They were now completely pinned down by their own reckless, arrogant criminality displayed perfectly for the entire world to witness here tonight. I turned my attention back to Anthony, who was kneeling on the polished floorboards, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his absolute failure. He was sweating profusely, his expensive suit clinging awkwardly to his trembling frame. I reached out with a swift, aggressive motion and firmly grabbed the breast pocket of his tailored jacket. With one forceful pull, I extracted the thick, folded legal document he had been carrying so proudly all evening. I held the fraudulent power of attorney high above my head, waving the pristine white paper aggressively for every single flashing media camera to capture. Anthony stared up at me, his eyes wide with a frantic, desperate pleading that I completely ignored. I brought the microphone back up to my lips, my voice echoing like thunder across the grand ballroom. "You honestly thought you had legally outsmarted me, Anthony?" I bellowed, staring down at my pathetic, trembling son with profound, unapologetic disdain. "You completely believed that forcing a supposedly senile old man to sign his life away in the dark would finally solve all of your disastrous financial failures." I unfolded the heavy legal document, dramatically displaying the final signature page directly toward the closest camera lens. "Let me read the supposedly binding signature that your corrupt, bribed notary public so blindly and foolishly stamped with his official seal." I pointed my finger sharply at the ridiculous, childish scrawl. Signed, G.H. Daddy. The audience let out a collective mocking gasp as they fully comprehended the sheer absurdity of the document. "This piece of paper is absolute garbage," I declared, tearing the thick parchment aggressively in half, letting the shredded pieces flutter down onto Anthony's expensive leather shoes. "It possesses zero legal authority. You hold absolutely nothing." Anthony let out a guttural, suffocating sob, burying his pale face into his shaking hands. The brilliant trap I had meticulously set was finally springing shut around their greedy necks. But I was not finished completely destroying their pathetic, materialistic existence. "And just to guarantee that you and your miserable spouses never steal another single dime from my legacy, I took extreme legal precautions," I announced powerfully. As of early this morning, my trusted attorney legally locked the deed to my Atlanta house into an impenetrable, irrevocable trust. Furthermore, I transferred the total ownership of my hidden, completely unencumbered limited liability company directly into that exact same trust. That highly secret corporate entity holds $8 million in prime commercial real estate, including the very ground this development firm is targeting. You all believed you were fighting over scraps, completely unaware of the massive fortune I built from nothing. You get absolutely nothing. The entire room fell into a stunned, breathtaking silence as the staggering $8 million revelation thoroughly annihilated their pathetic, greedy dreams forever tonight. They were finally left with absolutely no way out of the massive mountain of debts they had foolishly accumulated behind my back during this entire incredibly long, deeply disturbing, and sinister criminal charade. The devastating absolute financial annihilation of my vicious family was rapidly followed by an incredibly brutal professional execution. Sitting squarely in the very front row of the heavily packed ballroom, directly bathed in the harsh glow of the stage lights, was Anthony's extremely powerful corporate boss. The distinguished executive had been personally invited by Anthony to witness the spectacular real estate closing intended to falsely boost his failing corporate reputation. Instead, the seasoned businessman had just witnessed the absolute destruction of his employee's entire deceptive facade. The furious executive abruptly pushed his chair back, the loud scraping sound breaking the dead silence of the room. He stood up completely, his face practically purple with intense, unbridled corporate rage. He pointed an aggressive, trembling finger directly at Anthony's pathetic, sobbing figure, kneeling helplessly on the stage. "You absolutely sickening, deceitful criminal." The boss roared, his booming voice cutting through the heavy tension like a sharp machete. "The internal accounting auditors officially found the $150,000 you maliciously stole from our corporate expense accounts, Anthony. You thought you could seamlessly cover up your massive illegal embezzlement using this exact property deal tonight to secretly replace the missing company funds." The entire audience audibly gasped again, perfectly absorbing the sheer depth of Anthony's absolute depravity. "You are officially and permanently fired." Effective immediately, the furious executive continued, mercilessly refusing to break his fierce, condemning glare. "Do not ever dare to show your face near my corporate headquarters again. My aggressive legal team is contacting the federal authorities and formally pressing maximum criminal charges against you first thing tomorrow morning. You are going to federal prison, you pathetic thief." The final, crushing blow had been flawlessly and successfully delivered perfectly tonight, completing his total professional ruin in front of everyone. The massive, heavy oak doors at the very back of the grand ballroom suddenly swung open with a resounding, thunderous crash that instantly silenced the remaining whispers of the shocked high society crowd. A brilliant flood of harsh, bright hallway light spilled directly into the dimly lit room, casting long, dramatic shadows across the polished marble floor. Striding confidently down the center aisle was my brilliant and trusted attorney, Robert Harrington. He walked with the absolute, undeniable authority of a man who had flawlessly executed the ultimate legal masterstroke. He was not walking alone. Flanking Robert on both sides were 5 heavily armed, fully uniformed officers from the Atlanta Police Department. Their heavy black tactical boots marched in perfect, terrifying synchronization against the elegant carpeting, creating a rhythmic, intimidating thud that echoed ominously throughout the massive hall. The wealthy investors, powerful corporate executives, and eager local journalists immediately scrambled aggressively out of their way, practically climbing over the expensive velvet chairs to clear a wide, unobstructed path for the approaching authorities. The entire room watched in absolute breathless awe as the imposing wall of law enforcement moved purposefully toward the brightly lit stage. I stood perfectly tall at the podium, watching the glorious, magnificent sight unfold right before my very eyes. Up on the stage, the devastating reality of their inescapable doom finally violently crashed down upon my treacherous family. The absolute paralyzing panic radiating from them was practically intoxicating to witness. Anthony, who had just been brutally fired and publicly humiliated by his corporate boss, remained frozen on his knees, staring completely wide-eyed at the approaching police officers, as if staring directly at the Grim Reaper himself. Megan scrambled backward across the polished stage floorboards, ruining her expensive designer dress, desperately trying to find a dark corner to hide in, but there was absolutely nowhere left to run tonight. Monique aggressively clutched her head, rocking back and forth, crying out in pure, unadulterated terror as the massive officers reached the bottom of the stage steps. They had entirely thought they were the smartest people in the room, effortlessly manipulating a helpless, broken old man for easy money. Instead, they had unwittingly walked themselves directly into a meticulously coordinated, inescapable federal trap from which they would never, ever manage to escape under any possible circumstances, starting right here today. The lead detective, a formidable, heavily built man wearing a sharp, immaculate tactical suit, deliberately separated himself from the formidable wall of uniforms and briskly ascended the short wooden stairs to the main platform. He did not rush or shout, possessing the chilling, absolute calm of a highly experienced law enforcement professional completely accustomed to taking down arrogant white-collar criminals. He marched directly past my sturdy podium, stopping dead in the exact center of the brightly lit stage, squarely facing my utterly ruined, shivering family members. He reached into his dark jacket pocket, smoothly pulling out a folded official federal arrest warrant completely covered in heavy red legal stamps and bold, authoritative signatures. The blinding media cameras immediately focused entirely on his commanding figure, rapidly documenting the exact historic moment justice finally arrived. The lead detective planted his heavy boots firmly onto the floorboards, locking his fierce, uncompromising gaze directly onto Anthony's tear-stained, pathetic face. Anthony, Monique, Megan, and Connor, the detective, announced, his deep, booming voice easily capturing the undivided attention of the entire dead-silent grand ballroom. You are all officially under full federal arrest tonight for multiple aggressive counts of severe elder financial fraud, massive identity theft, check forgery, and the most incredibly serious felony charge of all, conspiracy to commit first-degree attempted murder against Gregory Hollis. A fresh secondary wave of absolute pure visceral shock violently rippled through the packed high society audience. Hearing the brutal, unvarnished criminal charges formally read aloud by a sworn police officer completely shattered any lingering shreds of doubt regarding my family's absolute, undeniable guilt. The detective took another aggressive, deliberate step forward, towering imposingly over Megan, who was still sobbing hysterically on the floor. We already have the completely authenticated video evidence displaying you actively forging those retirement checks in the dark, he stated coldly, staring right through her pathetic excuses. We possess the confirmed bank records proving the massive illegal embezzlement scheme. We have secured the tampered cardiovascular medication bottle heavily coated in your undeniable forensic fingerprints. And most importantly, we have formally arrested your fraudulent associate, the fake medical psychiatrist who already happily confessed to accepting your $2,000 cash bribe this afternoon. The entire criminal conspiracy has been perfectly comprehensively mapped out, documented, and entirely handed over to the district attorney for immediate maximum prosecution. You are all completely finished here right now. The crushing weight of their inevitable permanent imprisonment finally broke whatever tiny, pathetic fragment of arrogant courage Connor still possessed. Realizing his entire fraudulent existence was collapsing and the violent loan sharks would likely find him before he even reached a county jail cell, pure, unadulterated panic completely hijacked his nervous system. Without a word of warning, Connor violently shoved his crying wife Monique directly into the heavy wooden presentation table, deliberately using her falling body as a human shield to momentarily block the advancing police officers. He aggressively spun around and blindly sprinted full speed toward the dimly lit swinging doors leading into the massive hotel catering kitchen, located just off the right side of the main stage. He was frantically attempting a cowardly last-ditch escape, exactly like a cornered, terrified rat. But he did not even make it 5 full strides across the slick, polished floorboards before his pathetic getaway was spectacularly thwarted. 2 massive, muscular hotel security guards who had been standing quietly in the shadows near the emergency exit immediately leaped into explosive action. The lead guard forcefully lunged forward, completely intercepting Connor's frantic path, and brutally tackled him directly to the hard wooden stage. The heavy, sickening thud of Connor's body slamming violently against the solid floor echoed loudly across the completely stunned grand ballroom. His expensive, tailored suit jacket ripped open as the aggressive security guards swiftly pinned his struggling arms tightly behind his back, neutralizing the pathetic escape attempt in mere seconds. The 4 uniformed Atlanta police officers immediately swarmed the stage, executing the final glorious takedown with absolute ruthless professional efficiency. 2 officers forcefully grabbed Anthony, hauling him roughly onto his feet before slamming him face first against the polished glass podium where he had just signed his fake documents. Another officer effortlessly subdued a screaming, hysterical Megan, violently pressing her face directly into the dusty, carpeted stairs as she desperately tried to kick her expensive designer heels. The harsh, sharp, unmistakably satisfying metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting tightly around their wrists echoed brightly through the massive, dead, silent ballroom. Click, click, click. It was the absolute most beautiful, rhythmic musical sound I had ever heard in my entire 69 years of living. My greedy, treacherous family members were restrained, permanently stripped of their false power, and dragged down into the harsh, brutal reality of absolute justice today. The heavy steel handcuffs clinked sharply against the polished marble floor as the 5 uniformed Atlanta police officers forcefully hauled my treacherous family members to their feet. The glamorous 5-star hotel ballroom, which had been the pinnacle of their greedy ambitions just moments ago, transformed instantly into the agonizing stage of their ultimate public humiliation. The lead detective gripped Anthony firmly by the back of his expensive tailored suit jacket, aggressively marching him toward the grand exit. Megan, Monique, and Connor were shoved closely behind, stumbling awkwardly as the tight metal chains severely restricted their frantic, panicked movements. The vast crowd of wealthy real estate investors, prominent politicians, and powerful corporate executives parted like the Red Sea, completely clearing a wide, humiliating path for the disgraced prisoners. Absolute, undeniable shame radiated from my children as they were brutally paraded through the long center aisle. They desperately tried to lower their heads, attempting to hide their terrified, tear-stained faces from the relentless, blinding assault of the media camera flashes. The eager local journalists and ruthless high society photographers surged forward like a pack of starving wolves, aggressively documenting every single agonizing second of their spectacular downfall here. The bright strobe lights bounced harshly off the cold steel wrapped tightly around their wrists. As the aggressive police escort pushed them through the heavy oak doors and out into the sprawling, luxurious main hotel lobby, the sheer crushing reality of their permanent destruction finally took full effect. The magnificent crystal chandeliers above them illuminated their completely shattered public personas. They were no longer the proud, affluent aristocrats they had so desperately pretended to be all evening. They were exposed, pathetic criminals being marched out in front of the exact same elite social circle they had tried so ruthlessly to impress. The unified, impenetrable alliance they had proudly maintained while plotting my brutal execution completely evaporated under the crushing, suffocating weight of their impending federal prison sentences. The sheer pressure of the blinding media spotlight and the terrifying certainty of their absolute ruin fractured their fragile, toxic bond into a million irreparable pieces. Their collective silence finally broke, violently replaced by the dark, desperate, and deeply venomous instinct of trapped, severely panicked predators, fully realizing that their only remaining option was to viciously turn on one another to survive this devastating night. As the officers aggressively shoved them past the towering marble columns of the sprawling hotel lobby, the intense psychological pressure finally caused Megan to completely snap. She violently twisted her body against the tight steel handcuffs, glaring at her husband with absolute, unadulterated hatred. "You dragged me into this massive federal nightmare, you broke, pathetic loser!" Megan screamed at the very top of her lungs, her shrill voice echoing wildly over the relentless clicking of the hungry media cameras. "You explicitly promised me that this fraudulent estate transfer was completely foolproof. You swore we would easily walk away with $1.5 million tonight. Instead, you successfully managed to get us all publicly arrested, you utterly worthless, incompetent corporate thief." Anthony stared back at her with sheer disbelief, his face flushed bright crimson with intense humiliation as his own wife publicly humiliated him. "I only did this to sustain your incredibly lavish, completely unsustainable designer lifestyle, Megan." Anthony roared back furiously, spittle flying from his trembling lips. "You were the one greedily practicing his signature in the dark kitchen. You fully participated in every single second of this plan." Behind them, Connor was fiercely struggling against the firm grip of the burly hotel security guards assisting the police. He aggressively shoved his shoulder against his crying wife Monique, deliberately using her to deflect his own overwhelming criminal guilt. "Do not you dare try to pin this entire murder conspiracy on my massive debts," Connor shouted viciously, his face contorted in pure selfish rage. "It was your absolutely brilliant, sadistic idea to sit on the couch and wait 45 full minutes while your own father was dying on the living room floor. You were the one who explicitly ordered me not to call the paramedics until his face turned gray." Monique let out a loud, hysterical wail, furiously attempting to kick Connor's shins despite the heavy restraints tightly binding her wrists. "You horrible, lying coward," Monique shrieked wildly, completely blinded by her intense self-serving terror. "You forcefully brought that fake gambling addict doctor into our house to forge the psychiatric evaluation. You paid him the $2,000 cash bribe." The entire crowded hotel lobby and the eager local journalists watched in absolute stunned silence as the treacherous family violently ripped each other to shreds, desperately trading vicious accusations to save their own pathetic, utterly worthless criminal skins. The loud, chaotic spectacle of their vicious infighting was abruptly cut short as the commanding lead detective forcefully grabbed Anthony by the collar of his ruined, expensive suit. The burly officer shoved my disgraced son directly toward the heavy revolving doors that led outside into the cool Atlanta night. Two massive police cruisers were parked securely along the red carpet, their bright flashing blue and red lights painting the towering glass hotel facade. in a relentless, unforgiving strobe. As the stern, uncompromising officer pressed his heavy hand firmly against the back of Anthony's head to force him downward into the cold police vehicle, my son aggressively planted his expensive leather shoes against the wet pavement. He violently twisted his upper body around, desperately fighting against the firm, authoritative grip of the law just to catch one absolute final glimpse of me standing completely undefeated upon the grand stage. The arrogant, untouchable corporate executive mask had entirely melted away violently, replaced by the raw, naked, and deeply pathetic face of a broken, utterly terrified little boy. Genuine heavy tears of pure, unadulterated terror continuously streamed down his pale, flushed cheeks, entirely ruining his meticulously groomed appearance. He stared wildly across the sprawling, crowded lobby, his dark, panicked eyes desperately locking directly onto my calm, uncompromising gaze. "Dad." Anthony wailed loudly, his hoarse, breaking voice cracking violently under the crushing, suffocating weight of his impending decades-long federal prison sentence. "Please, Dad. I am your only son. You have to save me." I slowly walked down the short wooden stage stairs, stepping deliberately through the parted crowd of stunned, silent investors, until I stood exactly 10 feet away from his trembling, restrained figure. I looked directly into his desperate, crying eyes with absolute freezing and completely unwavering zero emotion. I did not feel a single fleeting ounce of pity for the ruthless, greedy monster he had proudly chosen to become. When I lay completely paralyzed on my deathbed, fighting for every single breath you calmly orchestrated my execution, I stated firmly, my deep, resonant voice easily carrying over the loud, chaotic hum of the flashing cameras. I stared directly through his shattered soul and delivered the absolute, undeniable, and permanent final blow to his entirely ruined existence tonight. "Just like you explicitly told the attending emergency room doctor regarding my failing heart, Anthony," I replied with chilling, spectacular finality. "Do not resuscitate." Exactly 6 months have passed since that spectacular, chaotic night at the downtown hotel ballroom. The cold, bitter winter of my ultimate revenge has completely thawed, beautifully replaced by the warm, promising spring of my completely new life. I am currently sitting comfortably behind a massive polished glass desk inside a sleek, incredibly modern office located directly in the heart of the revitalized Atlanta business district. Sunlight pours generously through the floor-to-ceiling windows, brightly illuminating the thick frosted glass sign mounted proudly on my solid oak door. It elegantly reads, "The Brenda Educational Trust," in bold silver lettering. After firmly securing my $8 million corporate fortune away from the greedy clutches of my treacherous children, I decided to finally put those extensive resources to incredibly good use. I completely refused to let my massive wealth sit idle or become a dark symbol of profound family betrayal. Instead, I proudly established this massive philanthropic foundation dedicated entirely to honoring the enduring, beautiful legacy of my late wife. We are currently actively using the immense profits from my commercial real estate investments to fully fund comprehensive trade school scholarships for ambitious young Black men and women all across the greater Atlanta metropolitan area. I spend my busy days reviewing inspiring applications, conducting hopeful interviews, and personally handing out massive financial lifelines to struggling students who desperately want to build a solid, honorable career in construction, plumbing, and advanced electrical engineering. I am aggressively helping them successfully build the exact same strong foundations I built 40 years ago, but completely without the suffocating, back-breaking struggle I endlessly endured. My pristine office walls are not decorated with empty, materialistic art or fake, smiling family portraits. They are proudly covered with framed graduation certificates and heartfelt handwritten thank you letters from brilliant young people who genuinely appreciate the massive opportunities they have been graciously given. The heavy, dark shadow of my previous life has been completely eradicated by the bright, undeniable joy of true, meaningful philanthropy. I finally found absolute, pure, lasting peace every single day right here, in this quiet, magnificent room where my real, permanent legacy actively thrives and continuously grows stronger with every single passing hour. The profound satisfaction of changing these young lives entirely washes away the lingering, bitter memories of the brutal betrayal I miraculously survived. The heavy oak door to my office suddenly swings open, interrupting my quiet morning reflections. My brilliant attorney and trusted friend Robert Harrington, strides into the room carrying a thick leather briefcase and a deeply satisfied smile plastered across his face. He takes a seat directly across from my desk, dropping the heavy bag onto the carpeted floor with a solid thud. "I have the official court verdicts," Gregory Robert announces smoothly, his voice carrying the undeniable weight of absolute legal victory. "The extensive federal trial completely concluded yesterday afternoon. It is officially over." He opens his pristine folder and begins to read the devastating final judgments aloud. Anthony and Connor were both unequivocally found guilty on all major felony charges, including severe elder financial fraud and conspiracy to commit attempted murder. The federal judge absolutely refused to show them a single ounce of judicial mercy. They were both aggressively sentenced to 8 grueling years inside a maximum security federal penitentiary without any possibility of early parole. The sheer magnitude of their brutal punishment perfectly matches the sheer magnitude of their unapologetic greed. I nod slowly, feeling a deep, righteous sense of closure washing over my entire body. Robert flips to the next page of his comprehensive legal report. "As for your treacherous daughter and your deeply manipulative daughter-in-law, they both rapidly folded under the intense pressure of the overwhelming federal indictment. Realizing they were facing decades behind bars, Megan and Monique desperately accepted severe plea deals from the ruthless district attorney to avoid a lengthy public trial. They both officially received strict 5-year prison sentences in a high-security state facility. Furthermore, Robert continues adjusting his expensive suit jacket. The aggressive federal asset forfeiture completely wiped them out. The government aggressively seized everything they owned to pay massive restitution fines. They completely lost their luxurious homes, their expensive designer cars, and their entirely fabricated affluent reputations. Their toxic marriages completely imploded during the highly publicized criminal investigation as they constantly blamed each other to save their own pathetic skins. They are completely destitute, absolutely alone, and permanently stripped of their cherished freedom. They traded their entire miserable lives away just for a greedy chance to steal the enormous wealth you painstakingly built." I lean back comfortably in my executive chair, soaking in the absolute perfection of their catastrophic, permanent, and utterly spectacular downfall achieved here today. I stand up from my polished executive desk and walk slowly toward the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the sprawling, beautiful skyline of the vibrant city I helped build from the dirt up. I turn away from the breathtaking view and look directly into the camera lens, speaking directly to every single person watching this incredible story right now. There is a deeply ingrained, extremely dangerous societal myth that blood perfectly dictates absolute loyalty. We are strictly taught from childhood that you must unconditionally forgive, endlessly tolerate, and blindly protect your relatives simply because you share a matching biological lineage. I am here today to absolutely destroy that ridiculous, toxic fairy tale forever. Family is emphatically not defined by blood. Blood just makes you biologically related, nothing more and nothing less. True, unbreakable loyalty, genuine mutual respect, and profound unconditional love are the only valid metrics that truly make you a real family. If someone aggressively uses your shared blood solely as a convenient excuse to continuously bleed you dry, you must find the overwhelming courage to completely cut the vein. Do not ever allow societal guilt or outdated traditional obligations to forcefully chain you to vicious, unrepentant predators who secretly wear the deceptive, comforting masks of beloved sons and daughters. Your immense physical and emotional well-being is infinitely more valuable than maintaining the hollow, fragile illusion of a happy, perfectly unified household. I miraculously survived a brutal, coordinated assassination attempt orchestrated by my own flesh and blood because I chose absolute, unapologetic reality over blind, foolish hope. You completely hold the ultimate, undeniable power to permanently rewrite your own tragic narrative into an undeniable, magnificent story of glorious, triumphant survival starting right here and right now, absolutely forever, in your amazing, powerful life today. Have you ever had to cut off toxic family members who were dragging you down into their dark, miserable abyss? Tell me your unique, shocking story in the comments below right now so we can all heavily support your incredibly brave personal journey toward total, absolute freedom and profound, lasting peace. Do not forget to gently hit the like button, eagerly subscribe to this fantastic, growing channel, and passionately share this devastating true video with anyone who currently desperately needs a powerful, loud wake-up call. Stay incredibly strong, immensely alert, and never ever let anyone underestimate you again today. Anyone. Let deceitful people talk until they inevitably hang themselves. Please share this video, leave a comment, and subscribe for more empowering stories today.